Good. I'm going to call this morning's committee meeting to order, please. Welcome. Thanks for being here at the Mission Fulfillment Committee meeting on December 13th. The first item that we have before us is an action item. But before I do that, let me welcome and recognize the student representatives who are here with us, Student Representative Kraft and Student Representative Dean. We look forward to your input throughout the meeting today. Secondly, I'll note that we do have an adjustment to the schedule. We'll be taking item 3, system-wide enrollment planning Duluth campus, before we take the diversity in the Twin Cities campus undergraduate discussion item. So with that, I'll first ask Vice President Kramer to join us at the podium and turn to the Provost.
Thank you, Chair Omari. We're bringing back to you now for action revision of the Regents policy on research involving women subjects. The minor changes and amendments have been listed in your docket, and I think if you have any questions, Vice President Kramer is here to address them.
Any comments, Vice President Kramer?
Chair Omari, members of the board. No, you saw this in October. No changes since then. The primary change originally was to replace subjects with participants in order to recognize the important contribution those individuals make in the research process.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
It's been motioned and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Vice President Kramer.
Thank you.
You have earned your salary for the day.
Who knew it could be this easy?
So now we will turn to what will likely be a more robust conversation, and a certainly important one, focused on system-wide enrollment planning. We've had conversations with several campuses thus far, and now we would like to invite Executive Vice Chancellor Delgado and Associate Vice Chancellor Keenan to the podium, and I'll turn to Provost Hanson for opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Omari. This presentation connects to a series of enrollment management discussions you've already had, and some you have lined up for the future. You'll recall that you heard enrollment management presentations last year from Morris and Crookston. At your February meeting, you'll hear a similar presentation from the Rochester campus. In 2016, you approved a 5-year enrollment plan for the Twin Cities campus, and you've heard annual updates since then from the Twin Cities campus's Office of Undergraduate Education. As I mentioned, the next update is scheduled for your February meeting, focusing on Rochester, and in March, the full board will receive 5-year enrollment plans from the other 4 campuses. This work is driven by the experts on each campus, of course, the relevant faculty and staff, but the campus work is informed also by the work of the System Enrollment Council that has been convened as part of system-wide planning. Last June, you heard an update from that group, and they're scheduled to speak with you again in June 2019. To help frame today's conversation about enrollment management at Duluth, as well as the subsequent enrollment discussions scheduled for 2019, I want to reiterate some of the foundational points that you heard from the System Enrollment Council last June. And just to give a little bit of context, in order to meet the university's capacity or enrollment potential, or even maintain current campus enrollments, given the state's demographic trends, that is an expectation over the next 10 years that there'll be decreasing numbers of high school graduates in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, and with an increasing proportion of high school age students coming from populations where college participation is currently lower than average, we're going to have to engage in a mix of recruitment strategies with 3 clear aims. First, we have to lessen out-migration of Minnesota students to colleges in neighboring states, recruiting them instead to enroll at the University of Minnesota campuses. Second, we need greater college participation from students from populations that are growing as a proportion of the Minnesota population, but that remain underrepresented at our campuses. There are, of course, other societal and state benefits that will accrue from that as well. And it also comports with the diversity resolution that this board has passed. Third, we need to continue focusing on enrolling students from out of state. With us today, we have Fernando Delgado, Executive Vice Chancellor, Academic Affairs at Duluth, and Mary Keenan, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Academic Affairs, also at Duluth. They will, of course, be talking about enrollment management at Duluth. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. Who'd like to begin? Please.
Thank you, Regent Omari, members of the board, Provost Hanson. It's a pleasure to talk to you. As you may know, enrollment planning is important to everybody in higher education, but most of you know the history of Duluth, so it's particularly poignant with us, given the blip that we had between 2012 and 2015. I do want to point out one of the things that's not in this report that is actually part of why we are doing what we're doing, is that part of our reaction to that enrollment drop was to radically restructure how we did enrollment and to restaff and switch the leadership, and that's why I'm happy to have Associate Vice Chancellor Keenan with me. She was part of that project. And it helped us to identify why we do enrollment management. So for Duluth, the purpose of enrollment management is to stabilize predictions of enrollment and revenue projections, optimize enrollment, including considerations for majors, diversity, and the academic profile of our students, establish targets, particularly around first-time, first-year enrollment, transfer students, continuing student retention and graduation, and I probably should add, increasingly international students. So how does UMD manage enrollment? Well, first, we've established a Strategic Enrollment Management Committee that further reports to the Strategic Planning and Budget Committee. The organizational structure supports recruitment, admissions, financial aid, orientation, and student support processes. The development of retention initiatives and student success work groups, that includes the collegiate units as well as central units. An ongoing program capacity analysis that informs how we identify enrollment targets for each year. The development of those enrollment targets through that SEM committee, as well as strategic planning and budget, of course, the leadership team. And then ongoing data collection to inform improvements to the student experience, particularly as we focus on first to second year retention and even second to third year retention. And finally, our ongoing collaboration with system enrollment planning efforts, because we're all in the same boat together at some point. You have in front of you here our historical U of M enrollments. You will see that Duluth has, like many schools, gone up, gone down. Part of the challenge that we have is, of course, we chase market along with other people. And as you've seen, what has happened in the state of Minnesota is that not only are we attractive for our own institutions of higher education, everybody around us finds value in the products of our K through 12 system, and they come hard at us, particularly in the metro area. And as you are also equally informed, you recognize that many of those states surrounding us come at us with tuition models significantly below what we have. So it is a considerable challenge, but one that we try to meet through a variety of processes, not least of which is the value proposition of why you would come to a UMD program, or parenthetically any U of M campus, and of course our ability to try to leverage price to get to price points that are more competitive with some of our regional, I won't even say beyond border, we'll just call them regional competitors, public and private. You want to start with this one?
I will.
Yep.
Regent Omari and members of the board, it's great to be here today. First, just a brief overview of enrollment on the Duluth campus. Undergraduates make up 83% of our enrollment. Graduate students, 6%. Professional programs, medical school and pharmacy programs make up 3%, and the non-degree student enrollment makes up 8%. 92% of our undergraduates enroll at full-time status with an average credit load of 15.4 credits per semester. And I'm missing the graphic. Hopefully the materials you received have the graphic of the state of Minnesota included in that printout. With approximately 1/3 of our undergraduates coming from outside the Twin Cities metro, UMD has a strong tradition of serving students from greater Minnesota. Students give multiple reasons for choosing UMD, including academic offerings, faculty contact, and campus size, but location and our outdoor setting are nearly always mentioned. Our recruitment materials not only convey our strong array of academic programs and co-curricular programs, but also a strong sense of place, the natural beauty of our surroundings, and the vibrant city in which we dwell. One comment from a survey of enrolled freshmen sums it up well. To the prompt, what was the deciding factor that led you to pick UMD? One student wrote, the majors, the town, and the fact that it is technically part of the University of Minnesota. Annual enrollment goals are set in consultation with UMD Council of Deans and ratified by the Chancellor and senior leadership teams. Goals are influenced by a number of external and internal factors, but most significant are recent enrollment trends, academic program capacity within UMD's 5 undergraduate colleges, and on-campus housing capacity. 92% of our first-year freshmen choose to live on campus. This fall, students of color and American Indian students comprise 13.2% of UMD's undergraduate enrollment, compared to 6.3% a decade ago. UMD's Swenson College of Science and Engineering, depicted by the gold line within this graph, topped 3,300 undergraduate students this fall, which included 839 new freshmen, or nearly 38% of our entering class. Swenson is the 3rd largest undergraduate college within the University of Minnesota system. This graph depicts UMD alongside other University of Minnesota campuses and regional competitors. University of Minnesota campuses are shown in the gold bars, public competitors in maroon, and private competitors in green. As shown, the middle 50% of our freshman class earned an ACT composite score between 22 and 26 of a possible 36. The differing ACT profiles between Duluth and the Twin Cities campus are noteworthy and allow UMD to attract some very qualified applicants who may have been denied admission to the Twin Cities campus. To this end, UMD participates in the University Systems Share My App program, where Twin Cities applicants are invited to have their application shared with one or more other University of Minnesota campus. 77 of this fall's entering class initiated their application to UMD through this process. With a mean ACT composite score of 25, these enrollees are a good match with our overall academic profile. Of students admitted to UMD, approximately 35% enroll with us, 14% at another University of Minnesota campus, primarily the Twin Cities campus, and 42% enroll at another 4-year institution. Data provided by the Office of Institutional Analysis shows that UMD's 35% admit to enrolled yield rate is the highest within the system, with the Twin Cities at 27%, Crookston at 24%, and Morris and Rochester at under 20%. UMD's top 4-year competitor institutions are highlighted here. One item that we monitor closely among our competitors is cost of attendance. UMD's current resident tuition and fee rate is $13,336, compared to the Minnesota resident rate of $8,200 at Mankato, just over $10,000 at NDSU, and $8,900 at Eau Claire. UMD's most recent first to second year system retention rate was 83.6%. Our campus rate was 78.7%. UMD's Strategic Enrollment Management Committee established the goal of reaching a campus retention rate of 80% by 2020, or with the 2019 cohort. A number of department, unit, and campus initiatives have launched in support of this goal, including actions to address high DFW rates in foundational courses, mentorship programs, campus-based or strengths-based advising, textbook support, emergency grants, enhanced student satisfaction assessment, marketing initiatives, a campus mobile app, and numerous other outreach initiatives. Many of these initiatives were supported through a small grant program administered by the SEM committee, who is also responsible for monitoring the outcomes and the results of that action plan. University goal measures for the Duluth campus include a goal 4-year system graduation rate of 45% and a 6-year graduation rate of 68%. Preliminary updated graduation rate data indicate a significant increase in UMD's 4-year graduation rate with the 2014 cohort. Overall, positive trends indicate ongoing progress in these important measures.
So as we look forward to what our considerations and challenges are, we recognize that there's going to be increased competition for fewer students, not just in the state, but across the entire Midwest. That will impact us because, as you may remember, as a board, you approved our ability to offer the Midwest Student Exchange Program tuition rate of 105% to non-reciprocity states. However, those states are going through their similar decline in first-year students attending college. We have a significant change in student demographics, and it creates an area of concern for us on 2 axes. One, their academic preparation. And so to anticipate that, we have revisited how we do retention and centralized many of the retention efforts. We're in the middle of redesigning our Welcome Week and are identifying how our American English language program might actually serve high school graduates whose first language remains in the household, not English. In addition to those changing demographics, the data from the state would also suggest that their ability to pay is hampered in comparison to previous generations. And so we'll need to rethink not only how we socialize them into our higher education system, but how we help them understand how college is achievable and how they can pay without extraordinarily burdensome debt. Finally, we need to continue to look at we need to also look at program capacity. This includes the availability of faculty. In some areas, it's becoming more difficult. We're barely keeping pace because, like many other schools, we're being poached with some of our best faculty. And so we're not necessarily adding faculty where we need to. We're simply replacing the faculty that have gone elsewhere. And then there's the issue of facilities. I'm not going to go into a big facilities discussion, but in certain areas where we know that there is capacity to grow intellectually and programmatically, we are hampered by the nature of our physical spaces. And so being able to identify how and when we can upgrade or expand those spaces to serve those areas will be critical. And this is particularly impinging upon the Swenson College of Science and Engineering, particularly in 4 of the engineering areas. Finally, residential capacity and regional housing crunch. Duluth has a very interesting housing market. It has changed dramatically over the last decade. It impacts our students' ability to find housing off campus. They therefore turn to the campus to find those solutions. And as you heard several months ago, we are looking to add residential components on our campus to serve those students. We also perceive that by expanding our ability to house them on campus, we might see a bump in retention on the order of 3 to 6%. And that is significant. Cost competitiveness with regional competitors. It's not likely that we're going to drop our sticker price. And then the question is, how do we identify what is the true cost of attendance and the value of choosing UMD over some of these regional competitors, both in-state and out-of-state. And this is going to be a key component for us to monitor moving forward. Inter-university transfers. I think UMD is a well and faithful participant in that system. In fact, we're so faithful that we're the University of Minnesota Twin Cities top feeder school. And it is unlikely that that's going to change anytime soon. However, as we bake those assumptions into our campus, we also have to decide how we're going to keep those students on our campus. And if we choose to keep those students on our campus and they choose to stay with us, what impact does that have on the Twin Cities, if any? Hence the value of that enrollment council. There's also the decline in 2-year transfers. And I think this is affecting all of the campuses. It particularly affects us. We have an opportunity, I think, through our programs and the pathways that we have to serve transfer students. However, we are dependent upon a different system of higher education, if you will, to provide us that pathway to those transfer students. And they increasingly are, in my estimation, closing ranks and making it more challenging for us to get into those spaces and get those students. Simultaneously, we see fewer students going to 2-year options because the economy is stronger. And so we see an overall decline in those students and an overall decline in who's prepared to come to UMD. And finally, and it's probably no surprise, international students could be a wonderful opportunity for us. In my estimation, we have the right program array to get a lot of international students. It is a volatile market for international students, and certain public messages, certain tweets, certain policy statements shake that system pretty dramatically from week to week. And we at Duluth, like everybody else in the system who looks at international students, particularly in places in Asia, are monitoring this closely. Nevertheless, we still have moved forward with significant international partnerships to drive new enrollments into areas like the Duluth School of Business, across science and engineering, in certain areas in the College of Liberal Arts. Our current enrollment priorities. We continue to plan for annual incremental growth over the next 5 years. That may take the shape of incremental growth in tuition revenue, and it may take the shape of additional students. I put that on the table because we never take the opportunity to consider what would a tuition increase impact, both the campus and our students. We are looking to address the housing capacity issues, as well as looking at high demand programs. We know what those high demand programs are. We track what students' interests are, and we work closely with the academic department heads and the deans of the relevant colleges to identify how we can both get students in there and potentially ease the bottleneck. This is particularly acute in areas like science engineering, where the entire programs are vertically oriented. And so it might seem like you can have a big funnel on the front end, but if those students actually persist, and they tend to because those programs tend to be destination programs, it can create a pretty significant bottleneck and capacity issue to serve them, particularly as those engineering students go into the upper division engineering and studio classes, where those classes are actually supposed to be smaller enrolled because of the nature of the projects they're working on. We need to maintain our commitment to transfer students, and we're constantly looking for ways to develop those curricular pathways and deepen our relationships with key partners. Over the next year, I think what we'll be doing is pivoting and focusing on 3 to 4 additional colleges. You can almost predict which ones in the Twin Cities who might be good feeder schools to us. And I'll be candid, in some cases, I'm going to leverage prior personal and professional relationships to facilitate some conversations. You build a network because you need a network. We are continuing to identify ways that we can enhance affordability and access. This is going to be key, because not only will we get to a place in 2025 we'll have fewer high school students, that demography will begin to be so significantly shifted that if we're not ready and willing to accept those students and meet them where they're at, we will suffer significantly, I fear. I think more importantly than whether or not an institution suffers, it's the compact we have with the state and society. We cannot create a system where the one population that is growing as a collective group is marginalized from the opportunities for higher education. That's morally wrong, and frankly, in the long-term health of the state, economically detrimental to make that call. So we will continue to identify those ways, and thankfully we're in the middle of a capital campaign, and hopefully that's going to help us, that argument, to drive more scholarships, because we're going to need them. We will continue to work to strengthen social, economic, and geographic diversity. I think everybody's acutely aware of the ethnic diversity that's available to us in the state, and particularly in the Twin Cities. But I also don't want us to lose sight of the social and economic disparities that are both in the metro and in the outstate areas. We need to be able to serve all those students, and historically UMD has been a place of excellence and a place of access, and we don't want to lose that. In addition, I'm redefining geographic diversity to be a larger than the state, a larger than a Northland footprint. We can have an impact through our research and service beyond the confines of Minnesota, and we're going to try to leverage that and our MSEP opportunities to attract more students to Minnesota. And that would include Canadian students, so partnerships with schools in Manitoba and Ontario. We will continue to enhance support for students' initial academic success. We will have a range of programs that are centrally under the leadership of Associate Vice Chancellor Keenan, but also tasking each of the colleges to identify customized approaches that fit their kind of students and encourage them to engage in high impact practices so that they can be both academically successful and satisfied, more than satisfied with their experience at UMD, and persist all the way through graduation. And of course, finally, we need to support timely graduation. This is an issue that will always come up anytime we're meeting with parents, and parents are looking at the aspirations that they have for their children and thinking about the impact that 5 or 6 years might have on their bank accounts. And so timely graduation is always going to be front and center in terms of our conversation, and we are both heartened by the jump in not only the four-year graduation rate, but the slight flux up with students who are graduating within 3 years. And we are open for questions and discussions because we were told to stay within 20 minutes, and I think we're at 19 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. Members, questions and comments about the material and presentation that we just received? Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. I'm trying to understand. I'm just delighted that you're mentioning terms like capacity and bottlenecks. I'm trying to understand a little bit more about what you believe your true capacity is, and at what percent of your capacity are you actually operating? And then along with that, could you address? I think you gave a couple examples of bottlenecks and your capacity issues. If you could give some numbers associated with that, and those are things that we should be addressing. And I'm not sure that the information was clear enough for us to understand.
Sure. So the question of capacity varies greatly by college. So if you ask my colleagues in the College of Science and Engineering, and if we look at our data, they're pretty close to capacity. They've got a couple of programs that are not quite at 100% capacity in terms of faculty to student ratios, but really it's a calculation of the number of students we have versus seats that we can put in certain key lab or production sites, particularly when you're talking about mechanical and civil engineering. If you look at some of the other colleges, candidly, we're 15 to 20% under capacity by my metrics, and that is trying to target sort of regulated seat counts in lecture classes of on average 25. The challenge there is in those disciplines, will we see that 20% come in the near future to fill that? Or will we need to right-size those programs and cut and redeploy resources to facilitate growth? It would seem logical to cut and switch those resources right now. But again, hemmed in by the persistent facilities issues, I'm not sure that we're going to solve the problem. So here's an acute example, Regent Shu. We built the civil engineering annex 6 years ago, as I recall. It had a certain level of capacity. We're 20% over the capacity of the building when we presented that building to be proposed and built. If we were to duplicate that annex, we could probably let in another 60 to 80 students. And that major continues to grow each of the last 3 years, even though I have told Associate Vice Chancellor Keenan, do nothing to publicize that program, do nothing to market for that program, and yet it still grows. So we know that there's demand there, because we don't even want to open the spigot, and there's still demand there. And those are key issues we continue to monitor. And as we look at both cutting budgets to get to a balanced budget, but also trying to cut budgets so that you can spin dollars around and reinvest other places, that's the delicate balance, because what priority takes first? Do we need to cut to balance the budget, or do we need to cut and create some of that churn? For many of the sciences, what happens is once you get through the sort of the large lecture classes and you start moving into more and more labs that are built on each other, those labs typically only have a physical capacity of 24. So if you have a large major, the number of sections you need to offer at the 3,000 level to continue them towards timely graduation gets more and more difficult, because the labs can only be used a certain amount of time, because you need to break them down or set them up for each set of experiments for each class. And that becomes a challenge. One way we're looking at trying to solve that challenge is to see what kinds of components we can take into an online environment, particularly in the summer. We know that a significant percentage of our students would and do take classes in the summer to stay on time to graduation or to accelerate. What would be the opportunity to double down in some of the areas that are high demand and try to put classes out there available and open to students, not requiring them to do it because that's against policy, but creating the opportunity for them to do that. The Leibovitz School of Business and Economics has done that over the last 4 years very successfully. They've seen their summer enrollment rates go higher online, and they've also seen their four-year graduation rates increase.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the admissions numbers, have you ever considered a test optional approach to admissions?
Vice President Delgado.
I'm going to punt that to Associate Vice Chancellor Keenan to see where that conversation is with our team.
Thank you for the question. It has come up in conversation, and we have looked at a few other institutions that have done that. It has not risen to the level of bringing forward an actual proposal. For some of our majors and some of our programs, the ACT like math score is actually used as part of the math placement process. So there's a number of related factors that would have to be looked at before we would move in that direction. What I would say, I understand the advantages of doing a pronouncement that we're test optional, of attracting applicants. But particularly within some of our programs, we do strongly encourage students across the spectrum of ACT scores to apply, particularly those that have a strong academic transcript coming from high school. And we do have a special review process that involves the collegiate unit in which they are applying to give clear consideration to every applicant. What I would say about our process for reviewing applications is that we scrutinize applicants to see if there is a way we can admit the student. That we are about access. We want students to come to us, but we want to make sure that their credentials are aligned with being successful on our campus. And so while ACT is a factor, I would not say it is, just one of two factors. It's one of many factors. Thank you.
Let me quickly ask a follow-up there, because I heard Vice Chancellor Delgado talking about meeting students where they're at and adjusting to ensure that they're successful. And even President Kaler, if you have any comments on this, I'd welcome them as well. Because there's one thing to suggest we're admitting so that they'll be successful with what we do, which is different from what I heard earlier, which is we will meet them where they are to ensure and adjust to ensure that they're successful. So do we anticipate that there'll be a point where we no longer will be able to say we're going to admit for success and then flip that a bit to say we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they're successful once they get here? Does that make sense?
Regent Omari, Regents, yes, I think I follow the nuance. If we say we're going to meet the students, and if we've made the commitment to admit them, then we've also made the commitment to ourselves and to them that we're going to help them be successful. And all we require of them is to be a full and faithful partner in that. So to that extent, we're in the process of re-envisioning our comprehensive first-year seminar. We are doubling down in some of our developmental courses, and instead of making them 3-credit courses that are 16 weeks, making them more modular, 8-week modules. And so if they make the advancements and they seem to have adjusted and everybody feels comfortable where they're at, then they continue on. If they need the next 8 week, we can put that in there. That also gives us the flexibility to handle mid-year transfers in as well. And I think some of the ideas that are emerging around retention and trying to do a handoff from the moment those students come for admissions and orientations meetings all the way through that first week, and then extending, if you will, the welcome week into the beginning of the semester so that there's greater and longer collaboration as we're helping those students adjust to sort of the hidden and oftentimes poorly understood norms of higher education that negatively impact many first-generation and low-income students. Those are all things that we are already starting to, if you will, trial run even before we see the numbers of students that we expect, so that we at least have some momentum going in that direction.
Great. Thank you. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Omari, and thank you, presenters, for the presentation and all the detailed and good information. So I'm trying to get a sense of what really are the primary drivers that would allow us to gradually increase enrollment over the next 5 years, or which you said is the goal. And so one first kind of clarifying question, I think you mentioned that the commitment is to increase overall revenue growth over the next 5 years, and whether that is a result of increasing students or higher tuition, is yet to be seen. I mean, I don't think we can do it by raising. I don't think we have really the option to continue to raise. So it needs to be through enrollment. So you're nodding. So I assume you're agreeing with that. So I guess the question is, what should we conclude are the most important drivers of enrollment growth over the next 5 years? It sounds from your comments like expanding capacity in high demand areas is really important. That there's a really big opportunity there. You've talked about retention and all the work that you're doing, which is, and you're almost at 80%. So that's a really important one. And I'm just wondering if there are, if we're to take away from this, here are the 3 or 4 things that are crucial for you to be able to grow enrollment. What would those be beyond the 2 that I've mentioned? And I think you're agreeing that those are really important.
Regent Omari, Regent Powell, I'll start and turn to my colleague. I would say at the beginning, yes, you answered the question quite well, Regent Powell. 2 of the 3 or 4 things. The one piece that I think we need to continue to focus on is not just how we're prepared to accept those students, but what we're doing intrusively to introduce ourselves to those students before and as they're about to make choices about college. I think one of the things that we lose in all the information about who applies, who are those students who make academic and intellectual choices about this not being accessible to them and never apply. That group is hard to capture. And that's the group that we've been talking about. How do we reach out to them? Because more of them are going to be part of our future. And we do everybody a disservice by not doing that, right? So that's part of the piece. And then related to that piece, we can come up with all the restructuring and prepare for them developmentally and intellectually. I think a key piece is going to be how do we leverage institutional aid in all of its form to make this education affordable to them. And not just that it's affordable, but how we're making it affordable is understandable to them as they're making choices to apply and elect to which kind of institution they go to. To me, that seems the key. I think my colleague might have more information, and correct me if I'm wrong.
I would never. And it's a really good question and something we spent a lot of time thinking about, so thank you for the question. One thing at first I would point out is regarding our housing capacity, because we do, and that is in the works, that has come before this board, and our folks in Residence Life have been great partners in recognizing this need and thus having the right kinds of beds within our housing facility so that we can house more students. We know, like this last fall, we had some students who in the end said, I'm not coming to UMD because I could not be in a traditional residence hall. So that'll be online in 2021, which is really critical. I think I would just echo the need for strategic use of financial aid resources. And while I think we have a strong merit-based and the U Promise is a strong need-based program, I think we're going to have to start to look more and more at niche populations where having a bit more aid will make a difference and then being able to continue. So I would say it's not even as much of a recruitment piece, but it may be more and more playing into retention. We know when we ask students that are planning on leaving us, why are you going away? Many of them are returning to the Twin Cities Metro, their home, and they cite cost and financial need. And that's students in, for their sophomore and junior years that are making that decision. So I think not just thinking about it being something we offer up front, but we reassess constantly with our students and see how we can help them pay for college.
All right, members, we have 4 more folks who want to talk, and we have 4 minutes. So I'm going to jump to Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Omari. I understand a little about the dynamic with our neighboring states, but you mentioned building partnerships with Ontario and Manitoba, and I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
So when Regent Omari, Regent Lucas. 2 years ago when we prepared the documents for MSEP, we worked with folks in the provost staff and down in the Twin Cities, and one of the interesting things that showed up in terms of reciprocity was that the state of Minnesota has reciprocity with the province of Manitoba. Which I thought was kind of interesting, and I asked why, and I got a glib answer of hockey, which makes complete sense to us in Duluth. But I do think there's opportunity there. There's opportunity in joint programs, there's opportunity in student mobility. In addition, our colleagues at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay have visited us, and we have visited them now twice in the last semester, to talk about ways in which we might be able to sort of cultivate almost a virtual university where we're working together and again collaboratively dealing with those populations between our 2 city centers that are oftentimes lost in this space of which direction to go to for higher education. And we've bandied about how we might both be able to serve simultaneously those students and get students in that space about 120 miles who struggle with finding access to good quality higher education, and see both of us as those equal points of destination.
Thank you. Regent Beeson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. You know, I think an increased level of general sort of enrollment strategy and recruitment strategy does pay off. We've seen some numbers sort of rebound. But I think in the long term, we should be focusing more on strength areas. And Regent McMillan pointed out to me, you know, we have these really differentiator programs up there in business and engineering. And that seems to me a way to create sustainability in enrollment and setting apart from the competition on either one of the states. The challenge is that's expensive. Those facilities are really, you made that point, but I don't know any other way to sort of achieve long-term enrollment growth without focusing on that which you're already known to be excellent in, and where we know there's demand that we can't satisfy in the Twin Cities. So it would be interesting to have more of a collaborative approach with the Twin Cities on those programs, maybe having the students go back and forth or joint programming, but you know, those are flagship programs here, and they're emerging areas of excellence in Duluth. So I'd focus on your strengths, just putting it this short. Not that you don't know that, but you can't be everything to all people going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Regent Swigum?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Vice Chancellor Delgado, I too am heartened by your increase in four-year graduation rates. That's rather significant. I'm disheartened in the six-year graduation rates at 65%. I think that's very poor. I think about those 35% of the students that somehow or another are not getting their degree for whatever reason. Can you tell me what's the common thread? What's the reason, the factors for that 35% not continuing or finishing? Is it economics? Is it they're Norwegians like me? Is it you know, they're athletes and they finish their 4 years and then they don't go on and get their degree? What's the common thread? There's got to be some common thread that we as a system and you as a specific school can try to address.
Thank you, Regent.
Vice Chancellor Delgado.
So I'm not going to say anything about Norwegian because I'm not Swedish. Anecdotally, and I will turn to AVC Keenan here in a minute, it's cost. A lot of what we hear why students don't persist and don't graduate on our school is cost. It is sometimes, and increasingly we're watching this, social, mental health, and other kinds of adjustment issues. But those are more recent phenomena, but probably the most enduring and the greatest constant that we hear about why are you no longer at UMD, why are you no longer working towards your degree? It's cost.
I expected cost to be a thing, but these are yet students that are full-time students, if I'm reading this correctly. So they've already paid the full cost of the 4 years. They've already paid the full cost of the 5 years. They've already paid the full cost of the 6 years. At some time or another, you have to get a result, a performance for your cost.
Regent Omari, Regent Swigum, there's a hidden cost to the cost. So if you're struggling to pay your bills, you will likely take fewer credits. Even if you don't take fewer credits, and you saw the slide that our students average about 15 credits, your academic performance may suffer. And so my supposition is if I were to go look at that data, the number of those students who have lower GPAs or who are retaking classes is higher than the students significantly higher than the students who are going through in a straight 4 years. So when we talk about costs, it's not just I'm stopping to going to school. It's the constant worry and the amount of work you have to do while you're going into school also impinges upon your ability to academically succeed from semester to semester, sometimes even course to course.
Thank you.
Regent Anderson.
Thanks, Regent Omari, Chair Omari, and I'll try to be brief, but you know my comments are very similar to Regent Beeson. When I listened, I read this last night, when I listened to the presentation, the word that comes to mind for me is paradox. I think, does Duluth really need to increase their enrollment, or do we need to define our enrollment? I hear you say that tuition is high versus competitors. Well, it's high versus St. Cloud State and Moorhead State and Winona State, some of the greater Minnesota schools. But I also saw a graphic where you get over 50% of your enrollment from the Twin Cities area. And I would argue that for a four-year college, your tuition is the low-cost value proposition of going to Twin Cities campus, St. Thomas, Augsburg, Hamlin, Bethel. So where you get 50% of your students, you are the low-cost value provider. You guys have great, and you pointed it out with the engineering school. You got great enrollment in business school, engineering. I know your medical school is great. I know your pharmacy school does really, really well. Do we need to focus more? I'm just asking the question. Focus on what we want to be, or do we want to be that state college to everybody and compete against the low-cost St. Cloud States, Moorhead States, Winona States, Mankato States? I think the word is paradox. We have to really figure out who Duluth wants to be. That's I don't really have a question, but that's my comment.
Any closing remarks?
Regent Omari, Regent Anderson, that's great. Regent Anderson, what you just suggested, and I think we're trying to get at that with our revitalized strategic plan that we just put through last year to try to identify not only who we are for ourselves, but through the Enrollment Council, trying to have a conversation with our other colleagues where we fit in this family of brands that is called the University of Minnesota. That's been part of our ongoing conversation, and frankly, one of the more enjoyable parts of that interaction with our colleagues. In terms of the paradoxes, there are lots of paradoxes. Anytime you build an entire business predicated on decision-making of 18 and 19-year-olds, you're going to live in a space of paradox. And clearly, we're not trying to be all things to all people. I'll be candid knowing I have some colleagues behind me who might be disquieted by what I'm about to say, but in my time here, we've gone through 3 rounds of budget cuts, 1 large, 2 smaller. Every college has been hit, with the exception of the College of Science and Engineering. We have intentionally protected them because we know that they have continued to be a driver of growth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for that conversation. Next, we'll very quickly turn to diversity in the Twin Cities campus undergraduate education. This is a discussion item and update from a resolution that we adopted. And I will turn to Provost Hanson for opening remarks as they transition to the microphone.
Thank you, Chair Omari. And I am pleased to welcome Bob McMaster, Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, and Sean Garrick, who is a Professor of Mechanical Engineering and also Associate Vice President for Equity and Diversity. They'll give a progress update related to the board's resolution on diversity in undergraduate education on the Twin Cities campus. The resolution, you remember, was approved just about a year ago. So, Bob and Sean, I turn it over to you.
Welcome. Thank you.
This Chair Omari, members of the committee, as Provost Hanson mentioned, we're here to give an update, a second update on the resolution that was passed about a year and a half ago dealing with diversity on the Twin Cities campus. This is a resolution itself, or parts of the resolution. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there were a set of expectations put forward on progress that we'd make as an institution in narrowing achievement gaps, graduation gaps, in the outreach to students of color and American Indian students, and around the campus climate and student satisfaction. Those were the 3 basic areas that were part of the resolution. To get to the first part of the progress we've made around growth and multicultural recruitment initiatives, and we tend to measure this over a 5-year period, not a year-to-year period, because there's a lot of variation that you see year-to-year in these data. But over the period 2013 to 2018, and this is mostly done through the admissions unit within my office, there's been growth from the number of events from 9 to 13, and then some significant growth in the actual guest attendance, the numbers of students and parents who come to these events. And there's a whole suite of these events every year, and I won't get into the weeds on those, but there are dozens and dozens of multicultural events we have on our campus. This continues that line of data around growth and multicultural recruitment initiatives. Again, this disaggregates the data a bit in terms of the various ethnic and racial groups that we measure. One of the points I wanted to make here, again, in looking at this from 2013 to 18, is you do see a downtick, for instance, with African American or Black, but you see an uptick in 2 or more races. And one of the things we're seeing is more students within these categories identifying as 2 or more races, which is complicating comparisons, longitudinal comparisons across these years. Eventually, these numbers will stabilize as students decide whether they're 2 or more races or not. But for now, we're going to see some uncertainty. But overall, we've seen some progress with these events. This slide simply is a graphical representation of the previous slides. One of the very important activities from the Office of Admissions is around application workshops and transfer pathway conversations. So we know that there are many students out there, in particular students of color, first generation, low income, who can struggle with filling out applications, filling out FAFSAs, the whole apparatus behind applying to a university. And our unit, admissions unit, is out working in the high schools and other places and sponsoring these application workshops. You can see some of them listed here. We also work very hard in identifying possible pathways for students. There are a set of students, of course, who are not admissible to the U of M and or because of costs can't come. And we try to educate those students on what are the options for attending another 2-year institution and then transferring into the University of Minnesota 2 years later. So again, a whole apparatus here in terms of educating students around application. There also are a whole array of key community partnerships, many of them listed here, that tether us to multiple units around the Twin Cities, the Northside Achievement Zone, the Wallen Scholarship Program, College Possible, of course, our own University of Minnesota core program. And so all of these represent outreach touch points for enhancing multicultural applications to the university. Another piece of this that we've talked about periodically is the need to disaggregate the race ethnic data as best we can. And so on our application form, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities application, and also on the Common App, although they don't have the exact same categories, we've been able to disaggregate the data. You can see the disaggregated categories here. And as we move forward, we're going to be able to much better answer questions about how many Hmong students are attending the university, how many Somali students or East African students are attending the university versus these meta categories that mask a lot of the variance that is problematic for understanding the nature of our multicultural student body. So that's a whole set of slides on what we've tried to accomplish in terms of outreach. I did want to get into then the achievement gaps and the graduation gaps because there's a specific metric to narrow those by 50% by 2025 that we're under. I wanted to, first of all, show where we are with our overall graduation rate now, 4-year rate for the institution, 71.1. Now you're going to see 2 rates here, and I wanted to clarify why you're seeing 2 rates. The 71.1% 4-year rate is what we call the Board of Regents rate. And we can count students who come to the Twin Cities and graduate from Duluth or Crookston or Morris. So those students get counted in our rate. For iPads, which is the next rate you're going to see, the federal rate, we can't do that. We can only count students who arrive here as freshmen and graduate as seniors. There's a very small difference between the two, but I wanted to note that because you're going to see that in the slide. So one of the places that we want to be mindful is where we sit with our peers. Are we making progress or not with the overall rate? And so I think we're doing okay here. We've been able to keep pace with some of our peer institutions in the Big Ten. So each year we try to recalibrate where we're sitting. You will see here a mixture of 2013 and then 2014 rates. We can't always, at this point in the year, get the very newest rates from these institutions. We have to dig into their websites, but I think we're doing okay compared to our peers. If we take that and then look at the disaggregated data for the racial ethnic groups that are part of this resolution, which includes African American, American Indian, and Latinx students, I'll start with an overall graph here showing the graduation gaps, four-year graduation gaps between white students and students of color. And you can see that the rate now is, the difference is 8.9%. Again, the resolution targeted a decrease of 50% by 2025. That rate represents the lowest gap in recent history. So the overall white rate is 73.3 and the student of color rate is 64.4. Personally, the ultimate goal here is to zero that difference. We don't want any difference. And if I can make a comment on first-year retention, the first-year retention between students of color and white students is zero now. In fact, this year, the first-year retention rate for students of color was slightly higher than that for white students. So that's the first indicator of how we're doing in terms of student success. This is the whole table of the four-year graduation rates by race and ethnicity. I just want to point to a few numbers here that I think are important. One is around American Indian. Last year we saw a fairly dramatic decrease from 2012 to 13. In that rate, we saw a rebound this year to about 55%. Last year, we had a decrease in the African American rate from 50.3 to 44, an alarming drop. This year, that rate rebounded to 58%. You can see that the overall four-year graduation rate then for students of color is 64%, which is the highest point ever. I will say that some of these categories have small numbers, especially American Indian, and so you will see a fair amount of variance year to year depending on the class. And if we disaggregated these data even further into male, female, and the categories, you'd see a tremendous variation. So again, this is the whole table. In terms of three specific comparisons, if we look at the American Indian graduation, four-year graduation gap, it's now at 18.4. That's large. That's not acceptable. You can see how it's bounced around. It has been over the last 10 years trending downward, but it still is significantly higher than we want. The next slide shows African American and white students. That number has been trending downward. It was at 30 points back in the early 2000s. And so the difference now is about 15%. And then for Latinx, Hispanic students, the gap is now 7.2%. Moving on then to the six-year graduation rates, same data. So I don't have to spend quite as long on this. You can see you have all the individual rates here. I will mention that this year, the six-year graduation rate for our campus went down by 0.2 of a point, went from 80.6 to 80.4. We actually knew this was going to happen based on the four-year rates and the five-year rates moving into the six-year rates. There's going to be a rebound on that next year. And if we start to look at the disaggregated data, we did see a downtick this year with the African American six-year rate going from 75 to 73. We did see a significant increase in the American Indian rate going from 62 to 72, and then a a nice increase in the Latinx Hispanic rate from 76 to 82. So you're getting a sense of how we look at these data. Again, if we look at the same gaps here, you're looking at the gaps for American Indian and whites, now at 9.1%. I think the good news here is that narrowed from 19.4 to 9% in 1 year. Again, that number can be very changeable year by year. African American and whites now at 8.0%, that one up slightly this year, and then Hispanic Latinx. And this is an interesting graph because it shows that the 6-year graduation rate for Latinx students is actually higher now than that for white students. That's why it's showing up as negative. So I guess the point here is, this is, let me, one more table and then the point. We're also looking at the 3-year graduation rates for transfer students. We're showing some signs of, I don't want to say trouble, but some uncertainty with transfer students. We're seeing the pipelines dry up a bit, and we're seeing we're having some trouble reaching our targets with transfer students, and we're also seeing some problems with retention and graduation rates with transfer students. And I think that's an area that my office and the university is going to have to start to return their attention to, is around transfer students and the transfer experience. You can see that overall that rate went down by a point this year, and you can see that in each of the categories there were mostly decreases, slight decreases in the rates. So this is a new metric we measure, the 3-year transfer graduation rate. What that means is we look at students who arrive here, whether they have 2 years, 1 year, 3 years, and then they graduate 3 years later. This is an overview of what you just looked at in terms of what's going on with the freshman 4-year rates, freshman 6-year rates, and transfer rates. I basically explained most of what's on this summary slide. So the third piece of this is around campus climate and the student experience. And we administer 2 out of every 3 years something called the CERU. You've heard about it before, this survey of engagement at the research university, student experience at the research university. And this provides very rich data in multiple categories on how students are performing at the university, how they're feeling about their experience here. And this table shows you some of the response rates. The CERU is goes out to all students. It's a population survey. And we have fairly good return from the CERU. 1 year, in fact, we're at 41%. This year there was a downtick to 30%, but that still provides thousands of responses to look at with the CERU. I will mention that the university that has the highest response rate with CERU is the University of Florida, and that's because if you want to be in the pool for football tickets, you have to take the CERU. So maybe we can be more creative about encouraging our students to do that. So there are 5 questions that we look at related to this resolution. I will say that after going through all these data again, I'm not 100% convinced we have the 5 correct questions now. I think it would be worth going back and re-looking at this a year or 2 into it. But the primary question that I think we have to look at is this one. Students of my race, ethnicity are respected on campus. What you're looking at by each race and ethnic category is a comparison between the University of Minnesota and then AAU, the CERU AAU peers. And what's very interesting here is you can see almost identical trends with our own data and the AAU peer data. You can see, for instance, let's take African American on the left. You can see a dramatic decrease in the feelings students had in terms of their respect on campus from 2013, 15, 17, a very troubling trend downward. You can see this was occurring at a national scale. The encouraging news here is for the University of Minnesota. For 2018, we saw an uptick in the student responses to this question. And you can see an almost identical pattern for American Indian, for Asian, for Hispanic, and white, where we compare the University of Minnesota and then the AAU data. So I think what we have to do is we can't just look at what's going on here, because often there are national events and issues that are affecting our students' sense of belonging on this campus. The other questions are around the curriculum. I think this is kind of an odd question for students to get their heads around, but it deals with, do we have diversity classes? Are we attentive to diversity issues in the classes? And you can see some significant differences here. The university president and other top administrators are effective leaders in promoting diversity. Again, I'm not sure most students would have a sense of what is the role of a senior administrator in promoting a positive campus climate. But this is one of the questions we ask. The university provides an environment for free and open expression of ideas, opinions, and beliefs. This is the free speech question. And again, we can positively see an uptick for 2018. And then finally, my social interactions on campus are not largely confined to students of my race and ethnicity, where there was a positive uptick with the black bar. So that's the suite of set of questions related to campus climate that are part of the resolution. I'll now turn the presentation over to Professor Garrick, who's going to pick up on a new committee we've created and the work of that committee.
Thank you. The purpose of this committee is to get to the question or get to the answers of what's actually going on and what's the cause of some of these observations, some of these trends that we're seeing. So this committee was created in response to the resolution from last spring, and the name of it is the Multicultural Student Success Committee. And it's a spin-off of the Strategic Enrollment Management Committee, and it's really bringing together a variety of folks from across our campus who have different touch points, academic, social, cultural, and so on with our students. So it comes from Office of Undergraduate Education, OED, the Office for Equity and Diversity, Student Affairs, as well as colleges. We're looking at student services, support programs, the faculty experience, as well as the classroom experience, things that are going on that may be termed structural, let's say, as well as community values and training and development for students.
There's one other point I wanted to make around a new initiative that the University of Minnesota is part of. It's called the American Talent Initiative. And basically, this is a consortium of universities, all with fairly high graduation rates, 70% plus for the 6-year rate, that have a goal of adding 50,000 low-income students to these 80 universities over the next 5 to 6 years. So we're a member of ATI. President Kaler plays a role here. He goes to the ATI meetings in January where they talk about goals and expectations. And the reason I put this slide in is that there's a strong relationship as we think about students of color and their success and Pell eligible and first generation. And there's a strong collinearity in terms of the issues and struggles that are faced by these three groups and the interaction. So this is an important initiative for us as we move forward.
And partnering with us in this work is the APLU, the Association for Public and Land Grant Institutions, Universities. As Vice Provost McMaster mentioned earlier, the trends that we're seeing is demonstrated in the bar graphs comparing our performance to the AAU. These are national issues, they're national trends, and we see some of the things, well, we see the same things that other universities are seeing. So APLU put this program together called Powered by Public, such that we can try to address this as a consortium, as a group, and identify some of these issues that may go beyond our campus, but that do play a role on our campuses. So it's really bringing together a group of people who are looking at this in great detail to really get a good sense of what's going on. Some of the things that have arisen from the work so far is, and I'm not sure if this is right or wrong, but they're targeting, there's a notion that advising plays a significant role in these student outcomes. So there's a fair amount of attention going into that. Are the appropriate advising structures in place? Where should they be within the college, within the department? Do the students have enough access to these resources, and so on? Our work in the Multicultural Student Success Committee has been really to go over all of the activities that are going on the Twin Cities campus, such that we can get a comprehensive view of what are the touch points, what are the type of interventions, when do they take place, are they academic, are they social, are they cultural, and so on. Thus far, we've identified roughly 75 programs or initiatives that are going on. 22% of them are housed within the college, so that may be within the College of Biological Sciences, College of Liberal Arts, and the rest are across the entire university. This pie graph here shows a breakdown of the type of activities or the type of things that the programs are trying to do. Because it's not entirely clear, if you wanted to do something to improve the student experience, what exactly do you do? Some of the things that we've learned from CERU is that some of the challenges are academic, some of it are cultural. If it's a cultural problem, then the college may not be the best place for that to occur. And at the same time, the colleges is where you typically get the largest number of these students, meaning you may not get a large enough number to build a sense of community if you leave the college. And at the same time, that cultural activity probably would be best outside of the college. So we're trying to figure out how to work those things. There are college efforts going on in almost all of the colleges. For example, one program is the President's Emerging Scholars Program, PES, which is, again, both campus-wide, but they're also college-specific activities. Another one, the North Star STEM Alliance, which began in CSE and CFANS a while back, but is now campus-wide and also system-wide. Duluth is an active member, partner with us in that activity. And these programs do, one of the things that we've learned from our committee is that the two examples I mentioned, PES and North Star STEM Alliance, if you look at the first-year retention gap between the students targeted by the resolution and the majority students, there is effectively no gap. One of the things that we've seen, one of the reasons why we think that is the case is PES, for example, targets first and second year, meaning the intervention that we put in place is working. The question is, can we map it out to the other 4 years such that we get the same result? I.e., if we were to do that perfectly, what we've done in the first and second year, then we would have effectively narrowed the gap or gotten rid of the gap. One thing we've learned from the North Star STEM Alliance is, oftentimes one of the big things in STEM, and I think this is true across most programs at the research university, the notion that engaging students in research is going to lead to better outcomes. And generally it does, but one of the things we've learned recently is that one roadblock to that are the experiences that students are having in labs. That is, oftentimes these students may have less than desirable interactions with teaching assistants that lead to some of the more sociocultural things that feed into some of the CERU data that we've observed. So I really do believe that this committee's work is really beginning to pay off, such that we can get a very fine-grained look at what's going right as well as what's not going right. The ongoing work, again, is largely what I've said, what's unique to our institutions compared to our peer institutions. As Vice President McMaster mentioned, if you look at our graduation rates across the Big Ten, we have very high graduation rates. If you look at the graduation rates for the students targeted by the resolution, we're doing better than a significant number of the schools within the Big Ten. So we have to find out really what's going on here such that we can completely zero that gap. And one question I'm particularly interested in, again, is where should the academic support be housed? Again, if it's within the college, you may not have a critical mass of students, a critical number of students within the college, but at the same time, the support is really college specific. So we're looking to answer questions like that.
Great, thank you to the presenter. So before I turn to list of questions, I want to first just recognize that the work around disaggregating the data is also in direct response to student representatives' report in previous years, maybe even the last year and a half, I think. So I want to make known that was a recommendation by them. And then secondly, on that same slide where it had the different categories, just a quick note on the, I believe it's from the African continent, or if it's Black or African American, I can't remember what it was, but it says South African, which I believe is supposed to be Southern African, and we're not asking if they're from the country of South Africa. So we should adjust that. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. You know, I voted against the resolution a year ago because I felt that the metrics around this were really unrealistic for a 5-year, and I still think they're quite aggressive, but I do appreciate the focus and the urgency that the resolution has created. You know, some of us are elected out of districts come from communities that are really underrepresented here. So in my community, the urban communities and the greater Minnesota communities, we are hugely underrepresented at the University of Minnesota, and this is a suburban-dominated undergraduate population. In my community, we have 5,000 babies born every year. 2,000 of those babies are born to unwed parents, and many of those are from families of color. I've had the opportunity to co-chair a college savings account program for St. Paul under the leadership of Mayor Carter. It's really trying to get at, my point is, as we focus on the urgencies of today with the students we have, our responsibility as a land-grant university and as a research university is to focus on the babies and increase that pool of qualified kids to help the families. Because if you don't think those families are disadvantaged, as I look at those babies, those 2,000 babies, day one, they're disadvantaged, their opportunity to go to the University of Minnesota. So I hope we remind ourselves as we're dealing with what we are today, this is a problem that's gone on for a long, long time, and it's going to take decades to fix. And the program that I'm working with is a college savings, so we're going to put $50 into the account of every baby born in St. Paul. And we're going to raise money to supplement it, and we're going to introduce the conversation about college day one with the kids, not kindergarten, because this is a day one sort of experience. So,
thank you. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. I have a couple questions with regard to, it's page 43 on our docket materials. I don't know what the page, actually it's here. Page 43 of 163, is that helpful? Otherwise,
no.
It's the Twin Cities campus new freshman 6-year graduation by race/ethnicity, okay. Single identification. So first of all, my question is, so if it's single identification, I think the data is probably skewed because we have a lot of people who don't identify that way anymore. But specifically with regard to how international is handled here, the largest number I've seen on all of these graphs or all these charts is for international in 2012, 85.2%. Okay. So what is that telling us? That this is a 6-year graduation statistic for international students that is 5% higher than the Twin Cities total. Does that mean that international students just like hanging out here and they're more persistent in terms of, you know, finally finishing after 6 years as opposed to the rest of the population? Yeah. And if that's the case, then, you know, that's an interesting number for me because that's bigger than any other number by quite a large margin. And then the other thing is, it would be more helpful if we could get down to the college level in terms of these statistics, because without knowing what's going on in the particular colleges, it's really hard to see what we should be doing or what we can be doing. For example, I know Carlson in the past has had some diversity issues, so I would expect maybe their numbers to be quite a bit better in a lot of these categories. And then, I don't know, CLA might be the one that where most of the opportunity is, but without knowing exactly what's going on kind of one level down, it's hard to really decide kind of what we should be doing here. Thank you.
Vice Provost McMaster.
Yes, Chair Omari and Regent Shu, a couple of answers to your question. One is in terms of the international rate, those numbers would be relatively small in that that's the smallest category of student, and so there's going to be more variation. But there's another piece of this, which is our third largest sending country for undergraduates is Korea. And Korean males arrive here and then have to leave for 2 years for military service and then return to the university after that. And so there's a fairly large segment, given the overall small international population, that actually are gone for 2 years and affect that 6-year rate. In terms of the college data, absolutely. We have all these data college by college, and you're spot on. There's a fair amount of variation you see. For instance, Carlson traditionally has had the highest graduation rates, both at the 4-year and the 6-year mark. Their 6-year rate is probably up around 90%. So we can certainly get those data for you.
Thank you. Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Omari. And thanks, presenters. There's certainly some areas where progress has been made, so really important, and clearly we need more. Thank you for your work. I wanted to talk about transfer students for a moment, and you mentioned that. And I know that I'm curious whether transfer students provide more diversity than our freshman class. And then I know that we have a higher percentage of transfer students than most of our universities in the Big Ten. And so I'm wondering if we're having trouble, some of the pipelines for transfer students are diminishing. Is our balance of transfer students to freshmen, is that the right capacity? Are we getting the numbers of students and the kinds of students that we want? So it's kind of the relationship between transfer students and regular freshmen.
Vice Provost McMaster, and I assume you're talking about race and ethnicity when you say
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Chair Omari and Regent Cohen, in terms of the diversity of the transfer class, interestingly, several years ago, the diversity used to be much higher in the freshman class than the transfer class. Over the last 5 years or so, it's shifted, so it's almost equal. Now, I can't tell you whether that's category by category or just the aggregated data, but the diversity numbers at around 24–25% are fairly similar. In terms of the enrollment management strategy around freshmen and transfers, I think that's something we're going to have to start to take a look at in a very hard way over the next few years, since we are seeing a softening of the transfer application pool, in large part because with Minnesota State, their enrollments have been declining as the economy improves. There's a direct relationship there. And Minnesota State has become very aggressive in building pathways so that their 2-year students will flow into their 4-year universities, not the University of Minnesota. So as we move forward, whether this ratio that you're well aware of, that's the approximately 65% freshmen and 35% transfers, and you're absolutely right, we're the second highest in the Big Ten. Is that sustainable as we move forward? I think is a very interesting policy question. We want to maintain access for students who couldn't afford to be here or weren't academically prepared as they applied as freshmen. But we also don't want to be lowering our standards and affecting our primary metrics of retention and graduation for transfer students, because we want transfer students to succeed at the same rate. Your target for transfer students, 3-year target, is 65%. And we nudged up against that last year, and then we dropped back.
Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Mari. Thank you, presenters. This is an area very interesting to me because I come from a community where over 50% of the students in grade school are English second language. We have 52 different dialects, and a lot of these families have come here to work in our processing plants. So they come from a low education background, low income type background. So I guess my question is kind of convoluted as I look at this chart that's up here right now. What kind of outreach program, if you look at the students back in 2004, when they were in high school and grade school, and the ones in 2012, what kind of outreach programs did we have then? And what are we doing now moving forward to reach these kids, to help them see the opportunity to go to the university? And what are career opportunities? What's the difference in that? I don't know if that question makes sense, but.
Sure. Vice Provost McMaster.
Yes, Chair Omari and Regent Simonson. Our Office of Admissions has, for many years, been extremely proactive in reaching out to Greater Minnesota with counselors and the events that I listed before. They're not all Twin Cities based. Many of these are in Greater Minnesota. And as there's been a bit more pressure from the Board of Regents and from the legislature to make sure we're attentive to Greater Minnesota and access for Greater Minnesota students to this university, they've upped their game in trying to make sure the counselors are even more vigilant in getting out to rural areas, Greater Minnesota, to talk about the opportunities, to convince students that yes, you are admissible to this university and here are the resources that can help you. We don't do much around career counseling at that level. It's more convincing students that based on their academic backgrounds and interests that this is a good place to study.
So how do we, I've worked with a community college in Worthington too. One of the big things there is they can get a 2-year degree in some tech thing, come out, make a very good living. How do we address that?
Chair Omari and Regent Simonson, that gets into the basic debate, if you like, between, I don't want to say vocational education, but more practical education and a 4-year R1 degree where students are taking a liberal education curriculum. We're going to talk about that next, where they're focusing in a major. And so in many ways, it's apples and oranges in terms of the direction for students.
Thank you. Members, we're coming quick to time here, and 4 more folks want to ask questions, so I'm going to ask you to be brief in your questions, and we'll go to Regent Anderson.
Okay, thank you. I can be pretty brief. First thing I was going to say, just a piece of information, and you have to know that my boys always say that Dad is a wealth of worthless information. But when he responded to Regent Hsu about the Korean students, you know, I like going over to the archives and learning about the University of Minnesota. One of the things I learned there was after the Korean War, and you're probably aware of this, that the South Koreans asked for somebody to come over and help them set up their university system. And it was the University of Minnesota that stepped forward and did that. And we still derive benefits from that today, correct? Okay, so again, wealth of worthless information, but I learned a little bit. My question actually has to do with the, well, I guess we're not voting on anything today, but the, and it's probably all semantics, but I don't like the word close the gaps. And I say that by, if we've got a cohort of left-handed students that achieve at 90%, and we've got a cohort of right-handed students that achieve at 70%, we can close the gap.
It's the other way around. Sorry.
Okay, well, depending if you're right or left-handed. If we can close the gap by the higher achieving students not achieving anymore. And I don't think that's right. I think there was a slide on there that says 4-year grad rates by ethnicity from 26 to 2014, where students of color have achieved now are at from 34% to 64. White students are from 54% to 73. So the gap goes, both have achieved, and yet we've closed the gap from 20% to 9%. So I think we should not only close the gap, but we should improve 4-year graduation rates for all. I think when all of us do better, we will all do better, and that will close the gap. So just my comment, I don't like the term closing the gap. I think we should all try to achieve better. Thank you.
And Vice Provost McMaster, you've told us there's a point where we'll plateau and we won't be able to close it anymore. What's I don't know what the number is. I think you've given it to us, but.
I don't know what the exact number is, but I think at 71% in terms of a 4-year graduation rate, I have my doubts that we're going to be able to push that much further. If I make up a number, 73%, 74%, that would be at the top of the heap in terms of R1s. And so what happens then is, yes, overall, we're at 73%. Let's get all of our students there.
Thank you. Student Representative Kraft.
Yep. Thank you, Chair Omari, Vice Provost McMaster, and Associate Vice Provost Garrick. So I have a comment as well as a question. I appreciate seeing the mention of disaggregation of ethnicity and race data, and that obviously is in application, and look forward to, as the years go on, seeing that persist beyond the application point and into graduation rate data so that that can become finer grained as well once the students who have used the disaggregated app have graduated. You had mentioned the volatility that comes, statistically comes with a small group such as the American Indian and Alaska Native students. Nevertheless, it is concerning the decrease in campus visits as well as just the volatility in general. And now that the Multicultural Student Success Committee has begun its work, returning back to the resolution that is sort of the impetus for this discussion, how do you address the feasibility of the resolution's demands given the work that has begun now and the volatility that we're observing with some groups that are the targets of this resolution?
Chair Omari, with these populations, I'm not entirely sure. I think it really will come down to, again, for these specific populations, and really for all the populations, trying to identify where they're, quote unquote, not being successful. For the recruitment part, I think what's going on in admissions as well as the core program can really have a huge impact there. So as I think Regent Beeson mentioned earlier, these are problems that are long-standing by the time the student is a potential student at University of Minnesota or college or university. With core, we're going all the way back to middle school to trying to engage them at that point, specifically with these populations that may not have college on their radar because they may not have immediate family members who are college enrollees or college graduates. We're seeking to just build that college awareness such that that can be there before there is a question of either an academic readiness and so on. Because that sort of stuff, research has shown that that sort of stuff can actually prevent the academic readiness gap. So I really, with these populations, I really do think it is truly not an academic thing. It is an engagement in getting them, making contact early, building scaffolded interactions such that both the potential student and their families see the University of Minnesota as a partner in their future.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap with Regent Rocha, recognizing that we're out of time, please.
Perfect, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Just a comment and then
comment question. Just responding to what Regent Beeson raised earlier. I live far enough west than from the big city that I still get some of the community newspapers and that still do the birth announcements. And I look at them, and oftentimes you can see if there's, one or versus two parents listed with that announcement. And it always strikes me when I see those that when you see, an announcement where there's only a single parent identified, immediately I think, well, the law of averages is not on this kid's side compared to those that have participation by both parents. And there may be, it just may be the way it's reported. But so that, I think that phenomenon that you described is, certainly crosses all demographics and geographic areas, racial demographics, and so on. And then I'm also caught in not wanting to think that the only opportunity for success for any child is that they have to seek a baccalaureate degree. There are certainly many industries and many occupations that would require other types of training and yield great success. So, these are very complex and ongoing challenges across the entire state. I'm also struck by the fact that I know people on a personal level who attended the university where particularly for women, they were firsts. The first to graduate from a certain program and perhaps even the first to be admitted to a certain program. And now we live in a world where we see that, women are more strongly represented among our student population than our men. And when you're talking like 52 to 47 and a half, something in that range, statistically it may not be an overwhelming number, but we certainly see as a matter of a trend that you have that prevalence that you now have baccalaureate-seeking students being primarily from the female population. I'm especially interested because we do break that out as it relates to the total population, but we don't break it out cross-sectionally as related to various racial and ethnic groups. I'd be very interested to see that because I'm very curious as to whether it's cultural phenomena or support from school at an earlier age, and certainly having children of my own, I see boys and girls sometimes act very differently, and that may actually lead to some of how they might be channeled in earlier stages of their academic career. And so if, to some extent, or if at some point we could see this broken out by gender within these ethnic and racial groups, I think that would be very interesting to see if maybe there aren't groups that might be disadvantaged, even beyond what we would traditionally have seen just based on ethnic and racial considerations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Regent Rocha. With that, clearly a lot of interest in the dialogue and a lot more work to be done, so we look forward to continued updates and progress in this area. Thank you to the presenters. Next, we will have an update on the Twin Cities campus liberal education requirements for discussion. We will have Vice Provost McMaster, so your seat's warm, and Professor Kolstad to also join us, who is chairing the committee, and I'll start with Provost Hanson.
Thank you, Chair Omari. The Liberal Education Redesign Committee has been working for really almost 2 years now. It's chaired by Professor Sally Kolstad. I asked the campus to reconsider, just as a matter of kind of academic responsibility, what really we at many universities people call general education, the part of the undergraduate degree that's distinguished from work in the major and perhaps the minor. And they have been working assiduously at this with the cooperation of the entire campus. Today, Professor Sally Kolstad is a professor in the history and of science and technology program in the College of Science and Engineering, who has been chairing this redesign committee. Along with we'll give some discussion of the processes that have been used, along with Vice Provost McMaster. I'm going to say a little bit about the history of liberal education, or again, general education and the current requirements, and say a little bit about how this process has worked and where they are now.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. Who's going to begin. Please, Vice Provost McMaster.
Yes, Chair Omari and members of the committee, what we'd like to do today is make a quick sweep through the history of LibEd on the campus, and then talk about recent efforts to think about a new way of designing liberal education. So interestingly, before 1994, there were no university-wide requirements. They were all college-based. In the early 1990s, there was a committee put together to design a curriculum. It was the Howe Committee, and they designed a set of liberal education requirements that were then required by all students in all colleges. It basically was a model that included what's called a diversified core that gets at the ways of knowing at the university, epistemology, and then the designated themes that bring relevance with these topics to society. So in 1992 was the Howe Committee. Then about a decade ago, there was a committee that revisited the liberal education requirements, and they made some adjustments to the existing requirements. For instance, a new technology and society theme was added. Two categories were created out of one, arts and humanities, and then literature. I was on that committee. Something I argued strongly against and lost was the reduction of two social sciences to one. And so some tweaks were made to the model at that point in time. If we look at our current requirements then, we have 7 courses in the diversified core. The students have to take 1 course in every category. There's a theme category. Students have to take 4 of the 5 themes. And then there's a set of writing requirements that are layered on top of that. One of the things that I'll mention is that we do allow for what's called double dipping, and that's where a course counts for both a core and a theme. In fact, you can triple dip, and a triple dip is a core and a theme and a writing intensive. So those become the most valuable courses in the curriculum. And if you, as a department, you can get a triple dipper, that means it likely will fill up pretty quickly. If we look at the core itself, you can see the number of courses that we offer in each one of these categories. You may say, wait a minute, why is there so much variance here? Well, for instance, in biological sciences, the courses are very large, so you don't need as many of them. They would mostly include or accommodate hundreds of students. In the mathematical thinking not mathematical thinking, but arts and humanities and historical perspectives, those courses tend to be somewhat smaller, so you need more of them. Same data you're looking at here for the liberal education themes, the number of courses that are in the curriculum in each one of those categories. There's a significant variance by college. Not surprisingly, the College of Liberal Arts offers 500 of these courses, many of them in the themes. You can see that the College of Management, CSOM, offers 2. Okay, so they do not engage heavily in the liberal education curriculum. Their students have to take the same curriculum, but they're taking that outside of CSOM. And then that simply converts that to the percentages in each college. This table, the next 2 tables are interesting in that it shows by college, by category, the enrollments. In this case, it's in 1 year, academic year 17 and 18, within those particular categories. And then at the bottom, you can see the total number of enrollments in LE courses. So in that year, there were 153,000 enrollments in liberal education courses and 272,000 in the grand total. So college by college, again, you can see the contribution. So for instance, look at CLA. CLA has about 80% of their curriculum, or their enrollments, excuse me, in the liberal education curriculum. If you look at CSOM again, CSOM has 2,500 out of 23,000 enrollments in the liberal education curriculum. So the point here is that the contributions vary significantly college by college. This chart simply converts those raw data into percentages. So we also see a fair amount of variation in the number of courses that students are actually taking within each one of these categories. So this graph is the average number of courses completed by LE category, and in many cases, students are taking many more courses than they need within each category. The example would be physical science. Well, that has to do with science and engineering is one of our larger colleges, and many of those students are having to take many more than one physical science class. What's interesting is the lowest number here in the cores is really literature, where students basically have one course in literature when they graduate. I should also add this table would include AP, because students can bring AP credits in that fulfill courses in the LibEd curriculum. So, as Provost Hansen alluded to, there have been some concerns, some calls for change in liberal education, and so this slide shows some of the faculty concerns that have been expressed over the years. Too much growth in the LE curriculum, who teaches in the curriculum, a need for periodic review of the gen ed curriculum, that it just can't sit for decades and decades without some kind of look-see. And so there was an extensive pre-planning activity that took place over a 2-year period before the current committee that was put in place in fall 2017 started their work. That pre-planning committee, again charged by Provost Hansen, looked at the Minnesota transfer curriculum, looked at national trends that were going on in liberal education. Nearly all universities periodically review their liberal ed curriculum, their general ed curriculum, to see what's going on. We held 3 open forums, university forums, where faculty and staff and advisors could come in and talk about their views on liberal education. We received lots of interesting feedback from those forums. I won't go through all the detail here, but the 3 open forums then allowed us to get the sense that, yes, the university community did want to revisit our liberal education curriculum. Some feedback from the forums. The one piece that I'll point to here is there are constant concerns about whether students should be able to AP out of a liberal education curriculum. Since this is a curriculum that represents the values of the faculty and the values of the institution in terms of what we think students should learn, should students be able to come in with a large number of AP credits and not take these incredibly rich courses here? You can get a sense of how I feel about this. But so that's another point of conversation from the committee. We also have to be mindful that we're part of what's called the Minnesota transfer curriculum. What that says is that students who fulfill the liberal education curriculum at Normandale and transfer to the university, we have to accept the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. If they haven't fulfilled the curriculum, then we look at the transfer course by course. It would be highly problematic for us to design a new curriculum that would not in some ways be tethered to the Minnesota transfer curriculum. So I'll turn it over to Professor Kolstad at this moment.
Thank you, Vice Provost McMaster, Chair Omari, and Regents for this invitation to be here. I'm going to first briefly review the process of our Liberal Education Redesign Committee, LERC, we often call it. I then want to indicate some of the goals that have emerged to guide the process of the current redesign committee. And then I want to point to some of the ideas we are considering as we recognize the underlying value of much of what we're doing right now. And I also want to caution you that my ideas are general, or my comments are general. This is unfortunately not yet an unveiling of a new curriculum, but I hope that will happen within the next year. So as you've heard, Provost Hansen and Vice Provost McMaster started a review process of the current required curriculum in 2016 with a pre-planning committee. And the question was whether our current curriculum, designed in the early 1990s and modified in 2008, should be changed. And if so, what would a new curriculum look like? To coordinate that pre-planning committee, there were all these campus-wide discussions with faculty. We also engaged students and advisors. The result was a decision to appoint a committee to take into account those conversations and to think about whether there's a new model or new redesign for general education for all of our undergraduates, taking into account, as Bob has suggested, the complexity of having many students arrive with credits in hand and knowing that our decisions have a significant impact on the transfer curriculum. For example, a few years ago, when things changed about a language requirement, we discovered that sometimes at small colleges around the state, those language departments disappeared because we had made a decision that we weren't going to require foreign language at the same level. So we have to be extremely mindful of what we do and what we're thinking about, and the committee is doing that. The committee that I chair began to meet really just a year ago. It has been meeting for an hour and a half on a biweekly basis since then. The committee is a really interesting, lively committee, as you might suspect. It has 20 faculty members, plus 2 ex officio members, Associate VP for Finance, Julie Tonneson, and also Vice Provost McMaster. The committee is interesting because it does represent all the colleges that have undergraduate majors here. The representation is proportionate, and so the committee represents all disciplines and ways of knowing that our university holds at its core. And so people have a lot of quite diverse ideas. We started with a review of the record of those campus-wide meetings, and what we found is that they had a lot of opinions, but very little common direction. We then had wide-ranging discussions among ourselves about what really should constitute core education in the 21st century. We then spent time looking at other institutions across the country that had recently revised their curriculum, and I'd be happy to talk more about that if you wish. We found no particular framework out there that inspired us to see some of those trends that we thought were worth keeping. While those open discussions revealed no strong or fundamental challenges to the current curriculum, there was general agreement that the requirements had become somewhat routine in implementation, and we all know about that kind of stasis, and they also had evolved into a system that seemed complex and cumbersome to some. The current system, as Vice Provost McMaster has suggested, is a framework that has these disciplinary or diversity core courses and themed requirements that can be combined into what Bob mentioned was double dipping. That is that many courses meet both a core theme and a core and a theme requirement. While there's considerable discussion about that dual identification, the feeling among some students is that it is viewed as a grid. They say, I must take a theme, I must take a core course, and I got to find a course that meets both of those requirements. And that in some ways that limits the sort of purview of what they see as our overall curriculum. And so that clearly was a constraint that some people have felt. The other thing is that some of the faculty have felt that the encouragement to build some such courses has led to a kind of complicated course design. If I'm teaching a course that meets both ethics and it meets history, what do I emphasize? How do I emphasize? Sometimes those integrate well, but for some faculty it doesn't feel like it does do that. So we were really concerned about that particular problem. So as we thought about what our committee's goals were going to be, we came up with 3 things that we thought were really going to guide our thinking. One is that we wanted to have very clear and transparent requirements. Students began to think of that grid as being the requirements that they had to meet, the kind of hurdles that they had to jump over. And we wanted them to think about what is a general education? Why are you at this university? Why are you taking courses across those kinds of lines? So we wanted to be very clear and very transparent about the requirements. It's not that we don't articulate those right now in the requirements that we make, but students lose sight of that, I think, in their advising system. We wanted a simplified structure. It does seem like this is a rather complicated structure. Could we simplify that structure? Could we, in fact, make it more linear? And we also wanted to somehow think again about this question of exploration and creativity. What are you trying to do at a university like ours? You want the opportunity to explore all the rich curriculum that's here. And so how do we open that possibility up while also ensuring that students have a very common core set of requirements? The framework that you've seen is this is the one Bob had up before, and what we discovered as we looked around, that we really do think a diversified core is what students need. We want our students to be able to leave this university able to talk about what's going on in the arts and humanities. We want them to be able to understand and read and think critically about the sciences, both the physical sciences and the social sciences, and we want them to really understand sort of the historical context in which we're operating today and what we think that means for the future. So we want a diversified core. We still want to have themes. We ask students, we ask fellow faculty, are there other themes that you think are important? And the curious thing that we learned is that people thought that these themes were actually important themes. But what we also discovered is that people had a kind of hierarchy in terms of which themes they thought were the most important. And we looked at writing, and actually having looked at curriculum across the country, I can tell you that the University of Minnesota has probably the most advanced writing curriculum in the country, because we do require that first-year writing course, and then we say writing across the curriculum, 4 other courses must have writing. But even there was a certain amount of discussion that went on. So as we considered this framework, we said we're probably not going to change that framework dramatically, but rather we're going to look at the balance among these various requirements, and we're going to rethink every one of those categories. So I thought I might tell you about 3 of the conversations that we're having about those things to let you know this committee has really been talking very hard and very deeply about what to do differently in the future. The committee, for example, is looking very closely at mathematical thinking. We understand that mathematics is really central in our contemporary culture, but the question of whether mathematical thinking that's met in a traditional way is the best way of thinking about mathematics is not so clear. And as we looked around the country, we realized that many institutions were no longer requiring mathematics, but they were requiring something called quantitative thinking. So we've been considering whether we should be thinking about perhaps a category that even combines that vocabulary, which says mathematics and quantitative thinking. The idea is that perhaps quantitative thinking should be a category that really thinks about graphics, statistics, and other pervasive ways of using quantitative data, as well as thinking about kind of core mathematics that you might have had as an extension of what was going on in high school. So the question is also whether we would keep mathematics and quantitative thinking in the diversified core, or whether we would see that as a skill and a competency and have that, like writing, be seen as something that every student should graduate with from our university, but with the idea that that's a skill set that has been built. It's a conversation. It's not any kind of decision we've made yet, but we're trying to figure out what are the right ways to think about the current curriculum. The theme categories are likely to be significantly updated. They were changed somewhat in 2008, but right now as we're talking about this, we met with students, we've talked among ourselves on this committee, and the one that is really coming to the fore is the question of diversity, power and justice in the United States. You know, how does that work? Do we have a curriculum that does that? Interestingly enough, when I met with a student advisory committee and I asked them which one they thought was the most important, diversity came immediately to the front. They also had some thoughts about the ethics requirement. Everyone agreed that they liked the ethics requirement, but there was some feeling that maybe ethics would be best addressed within the major, and that maybe it should come in the junior or senior year when in fact you've had some other kinds of experiences, you're looking forward to a career, and you want the kind of discussion about ethics that is both general, about what are ethics and defining ethics, but also how does that operate in the world that you're going to be entering. So we've been thinking about the themes and talking in some detail about those. The third area that has had some preliminary discussion is the writing requirement. We don't want to modify it in terms of the overall requirement, but as we talk to students, they are really asking the question about whether there are other things that could be also incorporated. They're really concerned about whether they're learning enough in terms of oral communication skills, the skills that they might need to use digital tools, and how to communicate in those other new venues that are out there, writing blogs or something else, because they realize they want to talk to the public as well as to their peers. So we're not simply saying we're going to endorse the current framework, and in fact we are likely to do some things a bit different in the framework. At the same time, we're really proud of the fact that we have a curriculum that seems to work, that really had raised no significant challenges. Neither the faculty nor the students said, throw it out. They really did want to have what we have here, a kind of diversified core, attention to the sort of issues and critical concerns we have in our culture, and interdisciplinary ways of addressing that. We are working to think about how we can more easily integrate that kind of interdisciplinarity in. We hope to find a place, for example, for the Grand Challenge courses within the required curriculum. And so that's what's going on in this committee right now. The discussion is very lively as we discuss the framework. We found it essential to kind of move along both lines simultaneously because we're going to have to balance diversified core and themes if we have a simplified set of requirements that's more linear. But we've made a lot of progress this year, and I really am hoping that within the semester, this next semester, we will have something to present to the Senate. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Professor Kolstad. I'll just start by recognizing that this is a loose update, and there will be hopefully something coming in the next semester. Secondly, just recognizing the process. I've been chairing a committee of 20 plus people, so I commend you in your efforts, and also recognizing that it's a good practice to think about these types of things every so often, and a credit to Provost Hanson for launching this when she did. And then lastly, I'll just note that it's important for us to keep in mind that a pillar of higher education is the fact that the curriculum belongs to the faculty. And so this is a process that the faculty has been driving, but it sounds like has been inclusive of students in a way that will, I think, lead us in a direction that makes sense and will ultimately serve the students and then the larger society well. Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair Amari, and thank you. I appreciate the update. Appreciate it. While you're in the middle of the process, and I think this is really an important, really important work. And so with that sort of as a preamble, I have a confession to make, which is that I honestly don't know today what we mean when we say liberal education. I mean, I think maybe at one time I thought I did, but I really don't know what we mean. And so as you went through your discussion of the work that you're doing, both of you touched on the idea these are, deeply held values, deeply held community values, sort of really, we want to challenge students to explore, areas that they just need to understand, if they're going to be leaders and really be able to be thoughtful about these issues. So I guess my suggestion would be that as you continue this work, I think it's really important to define, to state exactly what we mean. When we talk about liberal education, I think it's really important to state a larger purpose for what this is all about and sort of what we're trying to do, because otherwise I think it becomes, the risk is that it sort of becomes a distribution requirement. But it's far more than that. I mean, it becomes mechanical and or topical, even though super important topics. But have we really picked things that are the most fundamental and kind of reflective of American experience and history and values that are held most dear? So anyway, that's I think we'd really help ourselves if we begin with, this is the core purpose of this work. This is what we're trying to do. This is why it's so important, and then that guides kind of what follows.
Professor Kolstad?
Yes, Chair Omari, Regent Powell, that's a very, you're talking to someone for whom that's been the fundamental issue all along. It's true, I got very mechanical today, trying to think about what's going to be happening with the curriculum, but we've been talking a lot about what is it we're trying to accomplish for education for the students who will probably engage this curriculum in 2020. What kind of citizens do we want to have? What kind of values do we want those citizens to hold? What kind of ingenuity do we want them to demonstrate as they go out into a world that's changing so very, very rapidly? So indeed, we do think a lot about that, and we are certainly going to have a preamble to whatever the requirements are that suggest that. This question of liberal education is a really interesting one right now, because liberal education, I'm a historian, so I have to tell you that liberal education in the 19th century was a kind of common curriculum that every young man who went to Harvard or Yale took, and maybe it was echoed in Vassar and some of the women's colleges, but it was a very standardized curriculum which everybody shared. We're now at a major multiple university with all kinds of colleges within that university. And so it's a very different question, what kind of core curriculum should we have when a third of our students come in as transfer students and bring in all those requirements? Is there going to be that common experience? And the short answer is it's very hard to accomplish, and how do we do that? And what we've discovered is looking around the country right now, if you look at Harvard or if you look at Berkeley or anywhere else, you don't see the term liberal education being the major thing that they call their basic curriculum. And if you listen to what I was saying, I use the words core curriculum. I used the term general education, and I did that because we're not decided as a committee yet what we're going to call the curriculum, the required curriculum that we put forward. We will talk about liberal education and the values that that tradition has, but at many other institutions today, it's being called general education, core curriculum. Sometimes they're creative and call it pathways, because they understand that what traditionally liberal education meant in the 19th century, it does not easily translate into the 21st century. So we're talking about those issues, and we care very much about articulating, as I said in my presentation, articulating the goals of what this curriculum is going to be. So we will be purposeful.
Thank you. Provost Hanson, you want to add to that?
Thank you, Chair Omari. I do think that's an important question, and I know they've been thinking deeply about it. Some folks have worried about the way in which liberal education can sound as if it's sort of aligning with one part of the political spectrum, when of course it's sort of in origin was the idea of educating freely and for freedom, for free people. That's what the sense of liberal meant. But what the committee and the campus has been thinking hard about is, what do we think an educated person in the 21st century should know and be able to do? And that may not be just one thing. That may have been why a core in the 19th century may have been different as the social circumstances were different, but at base they've been thinking of this as what do we think an educated person should be able to do and should know, and that's been guiding, I think, the work here.
Thank you. Regent Powell, brief follow-up.
Very quickly, thank you for that. So I was a science major in college a long time ago, but there were distribution, there was liberal education requirements, and just, this is my little story for the day. The course that I remember with the greatest clarity 45 years ago was a course that studied what happened in Germany between 1933 and 1945. I don't remember any organic chemistry, but that course made an impact. Sorry. I mean, it's just sort of, that course really had a profound impact.
You set yourself up for that one, Regent Powell. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. I, too, am a strong advocate of the liberal arts. My majors are in the sciences, similar to his. But when I look back on what the courses I had to take, they were very important to my overall education and to my graduate work. 2 of my 3 kids have degrees in liberal arts. One's working in her field, the other's in another area, but using the stuff that he had. So I like your idea of revised curriculums, the quantitative thinking, looking broader that way. I also know a student that is an ag major with communication. That makes sense to me. And so I guess, but also another student, family member who graduated here in the liberal arts, went to work in a coffee shop, $30,000 in debt. And so I'm wondering what we do to help these students with career planning. To help them focus on this education. What can I do with it?
So good thing we have Vice Provost McMaster. Separate conversation from the liberal ed requirements, because those span the entire university and are not secluded to the liberal arts. So I'd actually ask Regent Anderson, would it be okay to take this question offline specific to the liberal arts if you're worried about that area in particular with job placement, because there's a lot of career pathways that have been happening under the guidance of Dean Coleman. Is that okay? Perfect. Thank you. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. This is a great conversation. Having been here and as an engineering student in the mid-'80s, I guess I was under the, what is it called, the collegiate-based program, which if you asked me what kind of liberal education program I was under, I would have no idea. I didn't know if my college was instrumental in kind of directing what kind of classes I took, or I kind of felt like it was based on what I could get at the time through the registration process. But things have changed since then, and I'm glad to see that we're taking another look at this. I do want to make a point about the APing out of LE courses. I want to just note that the APing out is actually what has helped us achieve the graduation rate we're achieving now, because students come in and they don't have to take some of these classes and therefore can graduate sooner or quicker in some cases, most cases that I've heard of anyway. And so I guess I would just caution you when you look at something like that, it probably does have a broad effect on, you know, something as important to us as graduation rate as we just talked about.
So both of the presenters want to jump in, so I'll let you two figure out.
Go first.
Okay. Yeah. Chair Omari and Regent Shu, I agree with that, and I realize that the dual credit programs have accelerated our graduation rates. In particular, it's helped within science and engineering, where they have a very restricted curriculum, and bringing those pre-credits in allows them to finish their engineering degree within 4 years. I guess I was talking from a purist standpoint, and in an ideal world, I would want all of our undergraduates to be engaged in these terrific liberal education courses and get our best faculty to impact their thinking. But it's a double-edged sword, absolutely.
Thank you. We've got Regent Anderson and Swigum to wrap us up.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Omari. I've got a couple questions and a comment. Maybe I'll just ask them all, and then you guys can comment to me. When you talked about the AP and concurrent enrollment, it got to me thinking about budgets and everything like that. And my question is, are most of the concurrent enrollment and AP classes, do those substitute, like even say college algebra in high school or advanced composition, are they going to be replacing, when those students come here with those credits, which is growing more and more, are they going to be replacing liberal arts credits that we teach here? And I'm just wondering how many kids are in each liberal arts class and things like that. So is that what they replace? My second question has to do with my very first board meeting was when the students told us some of the things that they would like to see us do. My question is there any, I very vividly remember one of the students sitting right there saying, you know, you people do a really, really good job of teaching us how to go out and get in the world and get jobs, but nobody teaches us how to manage our money and buy insurance and do that type of thing. So do we have any life skills or financial literacy, is what they called it, classes? I know we've given some financial counseling in One Stop now. We've done that, but to my knowledge, I don't think we've done enough. And finally, the comment that kind of got me was when you talked about that ethics and civics is really, really low on the totem pole. And that concerns me because I think virtually everything we do has to do with how we handle ethics, how we handle getting along with others. I guess if I was provost, I'd probably be teaching that at the top. And it concerned me that people said that is real low on the totem pole. So those are my comments. Abdul Omar, if you could.
Professor Kolstad, you want to start?
Chair Omari, Regent Anderson, I apologize if that's the way I made ethics sound. What I really wanted to say is when the students met, our program or our committee is very much interested in ethics and values for a whole lot of reasons. And so they really do think that that's going to be an important place for us to continue to put an emphasis. What I learned from the students was their perception that they thought that might be better later, that when they're 18, and this was a group of juniors and seniors, that when they were 18, they were just taking things in somewhat routinely because they were trying to get through their early education, that they might be in a better place to reflect on what ethics and values meant if it were to be part of their major or within their college and happening at a later point. So that was really why I'm saying we're looking at all of these things and talking about them in some detail. I'll let Bob answer the others.
Sure, yeah. Chair Omari and Regent Anderson, in terms of AP, it depends on the course in the department. So it's the department itself that gets to determine whether they will count an AP course and what the score is to pass. So for instance, in my home department, we have Geography 1301. There's an AP version of that. So if a student finishes the AP course, They get college credit, and that is a LibEd course, so it counts for the LibEd curriculum. So it's going to depend on the courses and the departments in terms of what counts. In terms of financial literacy, when our students arrive as freshmen, there are 3 web-based modules that they have to take. One is on alcohol, one is on sexual assault and misconduct, and one is on financial literacy. Now, I think you're correct. That's a far cry from a full course on managing your money. There are other courses students can take that are optional. And whenever we can, we talk with students about effective money management. And you're right, One Stop now has counselors that focus on that.
Thank you.
That answers it. Thank you.
Lastly, Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Professor Kolstad, I'm not smart enough to even know what my question is. I know what my answer is. My answer is balance. Balance. One word, balance. B-A-L-A-N-C-E. I don't know what my question is, very honestly. But I'm concerned about a curriculum that would not be balanced to our students. Professor Cole, don't answer yet. When I was at 9 years, I had the opportunity to teach at the Humphrey School. And I had tens of students, tens of them, handfuls of them, come to me and say, Professor Swigum, I think they called me professor. I don't know why. They could have called me a dummy or a stiff or a jerk or anything. But we took your class because we are filled over here at the Humphrey School with liberal thought. And I'm a liberal, but at least I wanted some different thought. I wanted to see a different perspective. I wanted some balance. And these were students who politically, Provost Hanson, probably didn't agree with me. But they appreciated the opportunity to hear some balance. And I can't control the curriculum. When Professor McMaster said, or excuse me, Chancellor, no, Provost, no, almost. No?
Vice Provost.
Vice Provost?
Vice Provost.
Interim Provost to be?
Acting Provost for exactly 3 months.
Okay. January, February, and March, right? But when you say to be Provost McMaster that the curriculum, the value is to represent the values of the institution and the values of the faculty, it causes me a little concern because I know some of the faculty. In fact, I know a lot of the faculty, and I'm not sure that those values are always balanced. So as you look at developing your new curriculum, what it should look like, Professor, please consider some balance in there because your students are yearning for it. I can guarantee you from being personally there. And again, I don't know the question because I'm not smart enough to know all the questions and how you're developing this new liberal arts curriculum. I don't know that, but please keep in mind some balance in that curriculum. That word balance is extremely important.
Do you want to quickly answer, or do you want to just say okay and
that would be fine. And okay is fine with me.
Chair Omari, Regent Swigum, I have to tell you that the discussions that we have, both about the diversified core and about the themes, are all about how to open students' minds, how to get them to think about things that they haven't thought about before, how to look at various points of view, how to weigh evidence. All of those things are really built into the descriptions that we're going to have. And we absolutely think that free speech and open conversation and occasional debate, when that's healthy, should be built into these classes. So I hear you, and yes, I think that the committee, this faculty committee, is very much committed to thinking about how we open students to new ideas, alternative ways of thinking.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Professor, you give me some comfort with your response.
Thank you. We appreciate that update, and we look forward to the final redesigned curriculum. So next is part 3 of our graduate and professional education discussion. We will be discussing impact and outcomes of graduate education, and next committee meeting we will be looking at impact and outcomes of professional education. So we have Vice Provost Lanyon, and then we will have 2 students, I believe, joining to do what we refer to as a 3-minute dissertation. So Provost Hanson?
Thank you, Chair Omari. And as the Chair has mentioned, this is a year-long series on graduate and professional education. And it's important to remember that about a quarter of the students in this university system are graduate or professional students. So Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Education Scott Lanyon will begin in a minute, but I want to call your attention to what you heard in September about the distinction between graduate and professional education. Which leads to some differences in the student experience and how faculty plan and manage degree programs. Today's discussion is about the outcome and impacts associated with graduate education. That is, traditional graduate degrees where a major portion of the program involves research or creative activity. This includes the PhD degree, for example, and most Masters of Science and Masters of Arts programs. In February, we'll discuss outcomes and impacts associated with professional education. This will involve programs whose graduates most often seek applied professional or practice-based employment in the fields named in the degrees, such as doctorates in medicine, law, or dentistry, and many professional master's degrees such as the Master of Architecture, Master of Social Work, Master of Public Affairs, Master of Education, Master of Public Health, and so on. As Chair Omari noted, Scott will be joined by two students, Kwaku Kadedo Ponsa Efa, who's a doctoral student in pharmaceutics in the College of Pharmacy, and Austin Yantes, a master's student in natural resource science and management in the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences. But for now, Scott is here, so thank you for being here, and I want to begin.
Thank you, Provost Hanson, members of the committee, Regent Omari, when he comes back. I just want to talk about basically quickly the agenda that we're going to be covering today. I want to talk about the role of graduate students in helping us accomplish our mission as an institution, the impact of graduate education on a variety of communities, and then I also want to talk about some specific outcomes and basically put a face on graduate education in many ways. So graduate student participation in research, I'll start there, has a profound influence on the university's research mission. Most obvious is the research that our graduate students do. There are about 7,500 graduate students at present. And that's the research they do for their own thesis and their dissertation. The research is conducted in the lab, in the field, basically around the state and around the globe. And most of that research ends up getting published, and the University of Minnesota gets credit for that. Each year, one University of Minnesota dissertation in each of 4 disciplinary areas is identified as the best dissertation, and here are last year's award winners. In the biological life sciences, Amaya Kirtani, overcoming transport barriers to nanoparticle-based chemotherapy. He's now a postdoc at MIT. In social sciences and education, Sarah Lageson, dissertation, Digital Punishment, the Production and Consequences of Online Crime Reporting, an assistant professor at Rutgers. In mathematical physical sciences and engineering, Deborah Schneiderman, dissertation, High Performance Materials from Renewable Aliphatic Polyesters. Current position, postdoc, University of Chicago. And in arts and humanities, Anne Zemo, Muslims in the Landscape, a social map of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the 13th century. Current position, assistant professor, University of New Hampshire. So those are examples of sort of the dissertations that were and research that we can highlight for you. But in many ways, the original research that students conduct for their degree is just a fraction of the contribution to research productivity for the university. I showed you this image from a previous meeting, and the idea was to help you see some of the ways in which, at that time, students were supported, but I'm going to use this to just point out that both master's and PhD students are heavily involved in our research activities as research assistants. Basically, in fact, at our last meeting, I mentioned that many of our faculty that came up for promotion last year, the majority of their publications actually had at least one graduate student as a co-author, just indicating how vital graduate students and postdocs are to the research teams of our faculty. But there's an additional vital role that graduate students and postdocs play in a research university that I'd like to explain. And to do that, I need to take a step back from graduate students and talk about the nature of a faculty member's research career. So I want to orient you to this graphic that I'm going to use to represent the life cycle of a research area. So here, time is the horizontal axis, The vertical axis represents how vibrant a research area is, how many scholars there are working in the area, maybe how many publications are coming out, how much funding there might be, a variety of things. And so over time, a new research area is developed, new ideas, new methods. Interest and funding increase over time, but eventually, in many disciplines, the interest wanes, all right? Now I'm going to add one other feature to this, and then I'll show you how this relates to a faculty member's career. So I'm going to use this circle here, this yellow circle, to represent the sort of the magnitude, the size of a faculty member's research program. All right, so let's think about this conceptually. We hire faculty members at the start of their career. They're frequently someone who's working in a relatively new area that's just developing. Over time, their research program grows, and ideally, by the end of their research career, they're at the height of their productivity, they're producing lots of publications and so on. But the challenge is that not all disciplines have this same sort of timeline for development, their life cycle. Some have substantially shorter life cycles. So in this case, you can imagine hiring a faculty member. And over the course of their career program grows, but in time, by the time they end their career, it might be quite small, their research activity, simply because the area that they're working in has changed, right? It's matured, and the discipline has moved on in many ways. Unfortunately, these days, in many of our disciplines, the life cycle of research area has changed really dramatically. We have a very fast development of methods and so on. And part of this is driven by the fact that there are technological, methodological advances that are really changing what we do. Sometimes it's actually changing in the funding agencies. Some agencies are really interested increasingly in funding just the newest method and so on. But the critical thing that I want you to realize and I want to think about is the implications for the short life cycle of these kinds of research areas for faculty productivity. How does a short life cycle really sort of relate? So we hire a faculty member. This is what disciplines begin to look like now, where within the broader discipline, research areas come and go with great rapidity. And we hired this faculty member because they're in one particular area. But that area has basically moved on after just 10 years. All right? And what we want, what's best for the faculty and what's best for this institution, any research university, is for faculty to be research active throughout their career. How does that happen? Because it does happen. How does that happen? So in disciplines in which research areas have this short life cycle, the only way for this to work is if faculty can switch, are nimble enough to switch between sub-disciplines within their field. All right? But unfortunately, shifting away from a successful research program can be kind of difficult. Things are going well. That's one issue. The other issue, sometimes faculty don't have the capacity. They've got their research program going. How do they add on another research area that they can sort of be experimenting with? Therefore, the odds are high that what might happen for faculty is that they stay in an area for their career and they end up being less research active than they or the institution would like. So our goal is to help faculty have careers that look more like this, with multiple switches throughout this period. They're research active. And the universities have a number of mechanisms to do this. One are sabbaticals. Sabbaticals are an opportunity for faculty to step away for a short period of time from some of their teaching, some of their service duties, to actually think about, in a bigger picture, how their discipline is developing and look for opportunities to add new capabilities to their lab, if you will. Another is our Grand Challenges Strategic Initiative, which gets faculty to think about other possibilities, pair with other faculty here at the university. So those are some mechanisms. But by now, I'm assuming, you're asking yourself, why am I talking about faculty? I'm supposed to be talking about graduate education. Well, it turns out that graduate students play a really critical role in maximizing the probability that our faculty are not only productive researchers, but they remain productive throughout their career. Our goal is to actually help faculty progress through their career, but as graduate students come into the lab, they help faculty explore new areas. So here, what I'm showing you is this one faculty member not only has their original research program, but now they've added this small component in a new emerging subdiscipline because they're partnering with graduate students. And as time goes on, this continues. It's not just a particular area that a faculty member might ask a graduate student to work in, but we encourage graduate students to read really broadly. We also require that graduate students build a committee, an advisory committee that consists of 4 or more faculty members. All of that introduces the faculty advisor to new faculty, new concepts, new literature. And over time, the research program is multifaceted. It's diverse, it's in multiple areas, so that the odds are very high that throughout the career, faculty are working in high interest areas with other colleagues and are productive and research active throughout. All right, so that was research. In addition to research, graduate students are vital to the university's success in undergraduate education. And again, using this figure, you can see that high percentage of our masters, research masters, and our PhD students are involved in teaching through their teaching assistantships. Graduate student involvement in undergraduate education is a win-win. Sometimes undergraduates find it intimidating to approach a faculty member who they know to be the world expert on the topic that the course is on. And in contrast, they find that graduate students tend to be very approachable. Furthermore, graduate teaching assistants have only recently mastered much of the material that they're teaching, so they're in a great position to anticipate where undergraduate students are likely to have some difficulty and to help them through that difficulty. Graduate students also serve as mentors and as role models for our undergrads. And finally, it isn't only the undergrads who benefit. Graduate students benefit from this opportunity to gain experience communicating complex concepts. So let's look at graduate student involvement in teaching. So I'm going to orient you to what this figure will be. We're going to look at discussion sections, lab sections, and lecture sections at the university this semester. The light blue bars will be introductory 1,000 level courses, and then all others are 2,000 to 4,000 are lumped here. Graduate students teach 45% of our introductory discussion sections. That drops to about 21% in the 2,000, 3,000 level. They're also involved in about 15% of labs, both at that introductory and sort of 2,000 and 3,000 level. And this is critical because the high percentage of graduate students in these sections is due to the fact that we need these kinds of classes to be small size. We just heard that there are fewer biological science courses in some of these Lib Ed. That's true of many of the lecture sections, but in many of the sciences, going with the lecture are these smaller discussion or lab sections, and those are taught by graduate students. We couldn't teach those smaller sizes with the number of faculty we have. We desperately need the graduate students in order to have this, what we believe is pedagogically appropriate form of teaching that sort of material. We do, interestingly, have about 18% of the introductory lecture courses taught by graduate students, and that drops substantially. These are taught generally by senior graduate students who have expressed interest in actually having teaching careers. And so they're well advanced, they have experience, and they're actually getting great training on what it means to be a faculty member. This brings us to the third part of our tripartite mission. Here, too, grad students are heavily involved in helping the university be successful. However, outreach is much more difficult to track and to quantify than our teaching or research. So we don't have a lot of data that I can share with you. Outreach is, by its very nature, incredibly diverse. It can happen on campus or off campus, in local communities across the state, across the country, or even globally. It can happen in person or virtually. Outreach can be formal or informal. Now, as is the case with research, graduate students contribute to our outreach mission in 3 major ways. It's the outreach they do themselves, the outreach they do with their faculty, lab, and so on, and, as was the case with research, the impact that they have on the outreach careers of their faculty advisor. And I'd like to illustrate this last point conceptually as I did with research. So in this case, think of this circle as the community with which a faculty member is most comfortable, is most knowledgeable about, and that's where they're doing their outreach. historically, and in many cases, faculty may end up their career with exactly that same community. Right? This is where they're comfortable, that's where they're knowledgeable. But faculty with graduate students, the graduate students actually have connections to different communities. And over time, the faculty's own comfort level, experience, and contacts has grown so that their total community for which they're doing outreach has increased, thanks to the involvement of graduate students and postdocs. So in summary, graduate education and graduate students play a vital role in all aspects of our institutional mission. Without graduate students, we would be a much diminished university. We wouldn't be a research university. But that perspective is all about what the university gains as a result of graduate education. How might we characterize the value of graduate education and graduate alumni for society? This is an economic forecast from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics indicating that the most significant job growth will be in areas that will require an advanced degree. Indeed, some sectors are already having difficulty finding enough qualified people to fill these positions. Graduate education fills a critical and ever-growing demand for highly trained people. Now, given that many of our graduate students come from outside the state, you may wonder if we are simply training talent that goes elsewhere. In fact, according to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, over 73,000 University of Minnesota graduates with master's and PhD degrees are currently working in Minnesota. We'll just look at a single year. This is information from the Minnesota Employment and Economic Development website. So this is looking at post-baccalaureate alumni graduates of the University of Minnesota who graduated in 2013-2014 academic year, who reported wages in Minnesota 2 years later, 2016. And you can see by these major divisions the percentage of people who have chosen to stay in the state. As Dr. Gable mentioned in her public forum on Monday, Minnesota is sticky. Many of the people who come here to study stay. The University of Minnesota is one of the state's greatest assets for attracting bright, creative people, many of whom then choose to stay and to contribute. As a result, the quality of life for all Minnesotans is greatly improved. So that gives you a taste of why graduate education is important to society generally and to Minnesota specifically. The next question that I'd like to pose is, how important is graduate education to the students themselves? I mentioned that the greatest growth in new jobs is currently and is expected to continue to be in positions requiring advanced degrees. This is reflected by these unemployment rates from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment rate is negatively correlated with just how much education a person has. This figure shows the median annual income is positively correlated with how much education an individual has. Individuals with a university degree have substantially higher earning potential. So graduate education provides students with training that will increase their employability and increase their earning power. Now, I can imagine that some of you are trying to reconcile what I'm telling you with the things you've probably read referring to an overproduction of PhDs, often referred to as the glut of PhDs. For example, this headline in NPR in 2015, this headline from The Atlantic in 2016, or this headline from The Guardian in 2015. How can there be such low unemployment of PhD holders if there's a glut of PhDs? Those seem to be somewhat incompatible. And the answer is actually found in the headline from The Guardian, academic jobs. If you look at the total number of PhDs produced each year, it greatly exceeds the number of faculty searches. So there is a glut of PhDs if you believe that the only appropriate career path for someone with a PhD is as a faculty member. But of course, as we discussed at previous meetings, that's ridiculous. Graduate education trains people to be successful in a very wide diversity of careers. Indeed, there were so many of these misleading headlines that the journal Science responded with this article in 2016. So why is the idea of a glut of PhDs an illusion, as Science says here? The excess number of PhDs has been most often mentioned with respect to the humanities. So I want to show you some information regarding careers in the humanities. The University of Minnesota is participating currently in a national study sponsored by the Council of Graduate Schools, and the study's ongoing, but I wanted to give you some preliminary findings that are coming out. again, I'll orient you here. I'm going to show you data from humanities PhDs nationally who got their degree 3 years ago, 8 years ago, and 15 years ago. And I'm also going to subdivide this by whether they're currently in academic careers or in non-academic careers. So the question here is, how well did the PhD prepare them for the job they currently hold? Well, for those in academic careers, it's very high. For those who got their degree, humanities PhD, 3 years ago, not so good. 52% think it prepared them extremely well or very well for their current job. But interestingly, that goes up significantly later in their career as they've become more established, and actually, I think, are reflecting on exactly what that career, that training did for them. You may recall at a previous meeting that I mentioned that providing additional professional development opportunities to graduate students and postdocs is critical in order to better prepare them for their chosen career. And this slide helps support that because this still isn't 100%, right? We would really like to augment our PhD training to make sure that students really do feel that they're extremely well prepared. Interestingly, our own results from this campus, which we've just looked at, indicate that the percent of our STEM PhDs, science, technology, engineering, and math PhDs, responding that their PhD prepared them extremely well or work very well for their current job, is actually lower than this, which is interesting. We also asked, would they do it again? These students who got a humanities PhD. The answer for those in academic careers is yes, and not surprisingly, it's exactly the same pattern we saw for the previous slide for those who are non-academic careers. Those who've been out for just 3 years, not sure that they would do it again, only half said that they would take the same degree in the same field, but that goes way up once they've been out longer. So, what I'd like to do now is to conclude by putting a little bit of a more personal face on graduate education for you. And I'm going to stick with this College of Liberal Arts theme, and I'd like to give you some representative examples of PhD alumni. And in doing this, I'd like to show you three very different kinds of career paths. Those who graduated with their PhD and went into higher ed, sort of the way many people traditionally think about a PhD. But as Regent Simonson said, not everybody with degrees in liberal arts go on to stay in higher ed. So I want to look at people who went on in their careers outside of higher ed, but still doing research, staying in the discipline. And those who pursued non-academic careers, and it appears to have nothing to do with the discipline in which they got their PhD. So I'm going to give you examples of each. We'll start with Dr. Derek Peterson. Received his PhD in 2000, dissertation Writing Kikuyu, Christian Literacy and Ethnic Debate in Northern Central Kenya, 1908 to 1952. And you can see, not too shabby, number of really prestigious awards, currently professor of Department of History and African Studies, University of Michigan. Dr. Margot Canaday, 2004 PhD in Feminist Studies, The Straight State, Sexuality and American Citizenship, 1900 to 1969. This was published then as a book, and that book has received all kinds of prestigious awards. Dr. Canaday is currently Associate Professor in the Department of History at Princeton. Now, these two alumni are examples of what many think of as the traditional path for PhD alums. So now I'd like to introduce you to graduates who are still research scholars, but outside of academia. Dr. Corey Hunt, 2011 PhD in social psychology, When Worldviews Collide, the Role of Emotion in Reactions to Symbolic Threats. After leaving Minnesota, she joined Hart Research, where she has worked on projects spanning every major sector, including politics, labor unions, education, and nonprofit and advocacy organizations. She's currently Senior Vice President. Dr. Damla Ergun, 2010 PhD in social psychology, the interactive role of emotions and moral foundations in attitude polarization and strength. After graduation, she joined Omnicom Media Group as a market researcher in New York City. She then moved to Langer Research Associates, a public opinion research firm in New York City conducting all of ABC's public opinion polling, including exit polls for primaries and elections. then joined Global Strategy Group, a political polling firm also conducting nonprofit and corporate research, and now works for Facebook, based out of California, with their demography and survey science team, and her work there addresses broad social science questions of critical interest to Facebook's leadership. Also stayed in Minnesota. I meant to say the 4 examples that I just gave you all left Minnesota. I actually chose them intentionally to highlight the fact that they're some of our best recruiters, right? Because everywhere they go, they talk about the fact that they are PhDs from the University of Minnesota. And those who are in higher ed, they're sending us their undergrads. So the person I would like to highlight here is Dr. Mohammed Abdurrahman, 2013 PhD in linguistics. His dissertation, Sociophonetic Perception of African American English in Minnesota. He's co-founder and CEO of a company called Platabase, and their product is Remo.
Number 1.
Shoot.
Yeah, that'd be great. Can you actually turn the light down to your left a little bit? That'd be awesome.
That one?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. You know what? Bring those blinds behind you up a little bit too. That'd be great.
Yeah, no problem.
That's great. All right, everybody settle in.
Hi, I'm Mohammed, co-founder of Platabase, and this is Remo. I came up with the idea for Remo after my dad had several strokes. He had difficulty doing day-to-day things that he'd easily done before. So I wanted to give him a new way to control his world.
Remo is a wristband used to interact with your environment using natural gestures. It's as simple as pointing and waving at the device you want to control.
He didn't stop there. And again, this is a Minnesota-based company. He's now as managing founder of another company called Clutch SOS. This is an app for your smartphone, and it's intended to help the user get help in difficult or even dangerous situations. Users designate a list of their emergency responders, typically friends and family. And if the user is in a difficult position, being harassed, bullied, threatened, or perhaps they've had an accident or a medical emergency, they simply click the button and they're connected with the friends and family that they've designated. Their friends and family see exactly where they are. They also hear exactly what's going on. Everything is live streamed to the phone. They can actually talk to you if you're using this and provide help. They can call 911 on your behalf. The audio recording, location, date, and text are shared with their friends and family, so even if the phone is destroyed, there's a record. So there's no shortage of compelling stories we can tell about our graduate students and how they're changing the world. However, the best way to learn about our graduate students is to listen to them talk about their research. So today, I'd like to introduce you to 2 University of Minnesota graduate students and let them tell you what they do, and to do it in 3 minutes. The 3-minute thesis is a competition founded by the University of Queensland, and it's now being held at research universities around the world. The idea of the 3-minute thesis is to provide students with the opportunity to learn how to make the elevator pitch. They have 3 minutes. They can use a single slide, which you'll see on your screen, and their presentation must be geared to a non-technical audience. Our presenters today are the winners of the University of Minnesota competition held last month. Our first presenter is Kweku Konide Amponsa Aifa. He's a doctoral student in pharmaceutics in the College of Pharmacy and was the first place and People's Choice winner in our recent competition. Kweku.
Thank you very much. I think this works. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In the competition, we had somebody timing us, but I don't see any timer here.
Oh, I'm timing.
The hook. Great. So I'm from the Department of Pharmaceutics and in the drug delivery section where we just try to look at strategies to deliver drugs that have been discovered to the body. And if you look on my slide right now, I'm sure you can see 2 people with very different reactions. There is somebody who is very terrified of an injection. That's probably many of us here. And then there's somebody who is also taking their pill very generally. And so, regardless of the situation, we all have to take medicines at some point in our lives, whether it's for life-saving cancer treatment or your general vitamin pills you take every morning. And the most preferred way of taking your medicine is actually to take it orally, to take it by mouth. Now, before a drug can be delivered into the body orally, the first thing is that it should dissolve in your stomach fluids. And once it dissolves, it should be able to cross the membranes and get into your bloodstream. Unfortunately, about 90% of medicines that are currently being developed cannot dissolve in the stomach fluids, which means you can't make them into oral dosage forms. And we'll be stuck with injections. But just like this lady over here, we all do not like injections. And so there must be ways to increase the ability of these substances to dissolve in the stomach fluids. And that is the focus of my research. Now, typically, many of these compounds are crystalline in nature. It simply means the individual molecules that make up the drug, they have very, very nice ordered arrangement, like you can see over there. We can convert the crystalline form, which does not dissolve in the stomach fluids, to the amorphous form. Now, the amorphous form, the molecules are disordered, but it can dissolve in the stomach fluids, which is what we want. The unfortunate thing is it's very unstable, so it always wants to recrystallize or get back to the crystalline state. And so to trap the disordered form, which is soluble, we have to add additional substances called polymers. And the job of the polymer is to prevent the amorphous form from returning to the crystalline state. And so it's important for scientists to understand the mechanisms by which the polymer will actually stabilize the amorphous form. And that is the focus of my thesis. So what we are doing is we have come up with one hypothesis that there should be a certain optimum interaction strength between the amorphous drug and the polymer so that you can have a stable mixture that can stay dissolved in the stomach fluids. And so what we do is that we use very advanced techniques to try and figure out an objective measure of the interaction strength between the drug and the polymer that will lead to a stable mixture that can dissolve and remain dissolved in the stomach fluids so that we can have many more oral dosage forms and many more happy patients like them over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kweku. Our second presentation is by Austin Yontas. He's a master's student in natural resource science and management at the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Science, and was a second place winner in our university-wide competition. Austin.
Thanks. So imagine if somebody asked you to describe me, but all you had to go on was this picture from when I was 5 years old. You'd say I was maybe 4 feet tall with bangs and a really cool Pooh Bear backpack. But 20 years later, I hardly look anything like that. And the same goes for wetlands. They take a long time to become fully grown, and their appearance can change dramatically over the years. Species of plants might be lost or gained, or an unwanted invasive species might take over. Yet wetlands that are restored through a state program called wetland banking are only monitored for 5 years. If we wanted to assess the health of those wetlands a decade or two later, all we'd have to go on is data from when these wetlands were, well, kids. And that's a huge problem for 2 reasons. First, we need to know if our wetlands are healthy because they provide vital services that benefit our well-being. They help with flood control and they purify our water, sort of like the Brita filter of ecosystems. Unfortunately, we've destroyed half of all wetlands in Minnesota by converting them to farmland throughout history. The goal of restoration, then, is to get these wetlands back up and running by reestablishing or repairing their soil, water, and plants. But since we only monitor for 5 years, we're unsure if we ever fully achieve this goal. Second, we need to know if the money the state invests in restoration is worth it. To reestablish a wetlands vegetation, land managers cover the site with a mixture of seeds from different plant species. These seed mixes are expensive, costing hundreds of dollars per acre. And when tens or hundreds of acres are seeded at a time, that adds up. Given these substantial costs, it seems crazy that beyond the first 5 years, we don't know if these seed mixes are even working. So that is exactly what I investigated with my thesis research. I revisited wetland bank sites that are about a decade old and recorded every species of plant present and how much area they cover. I've used this data to evaluate how some of the state's commonly used seed mixes perform over time. I've found that one of the mixes consistently gets taken over by an invasive cattail. I've also discovered that some species, like big bluestem, grow really well, while others like the irises and the blazing stars just aren't showing up. This information will help the state adjust which species are included in the mixes, ensuring we're getting the most bang for our restoration buck. Moreover, understanding when restoration efforts are working and when they're not will improve long-term outcomes, which means better functioning, healthier wetlands. Remember, it's our well-being and our money on the line, so it just makes sense to conduct long-term monitoring and to not abandon our efforts before these wetlands have had the chance to grow up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, we can take a lesson on how to wrap up our thoughts in a shorter amount of time. That was very, very impressive. So we'll be taking a class from you all. We have time for exactly one comment, and that goes to Regent Beeson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really a terrific presentation today. And Vice Provost Lanyon, this conversation about helping PhDs move from their career aspirations at the university to the other world seems to me part of the messaging should be that, and I think there's fear in sort of going into the business world, there's fear in going outside the university to start your career, but at the end of the day, they can do more often in the business world and in the and outside the university in terms of their mission focus, in terms of their value propositions. And so I hope that we're able to communicate that early in their graduate studies, that there's a real impactful opportunity to move outside the university if the teaching jobs aren't there inside.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Let's give them a hand. Congratulations on your And so I'll now turn to, actually I'll entertain a motion for the consent report. I'll entertain a motion for the consent report. Thank you. Any second?
Second.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Provost Hanson, any comments on the consent report?
We've all read it, so I probably don't need to review it, but I just want to draw attention to the fact that there are 7 degrees being discontinued. This board sometimes wonders if we're just adding things, but we do review and discontinue as well.
Thank you. Any comments on the consent report from members of the committee? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Information items, Provost Hanson?
That too is thank you, Chair Omari. That too is in your report, and there are a number of awards and gifts there that are very important accomplishments of student, faculty, and staff, and I commend it to you.
Thank you. Any discussion on the information items? Seeing none, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Oh, one last thing. I'd just like to note that Provost Hanson will not be with us for the next 3 months, and we look forward to you being back in this committee in May, and appreciate all you do for us. Thanks.
Very good.
Wow. Good.